Yo, Atlas speaking, and welcome to part 2 of What If I Was Reborn into the Avatar Last Airbender world as the legendary Antithesis avatar. Let the tale begin. Chapter 21. Upon returning to Aang and Katara, I found the great hunter of sustenance, Sokka, who had brought us. Imagine this. Nuts! Wow, Sokka, I'm impressed with you. Unable to find food in a huge forest. Maybe I should have bought not only spices and seasonings in Omashu but also meat, since you wouldn't likely be able to catch it even if you were starving. We'll be surviving on nuts alone. Oh, Sokka. I began planning a long speech, but was interrupted by a sudden noise. Boom! Our whole group froze and turned towards the source of the sound, somewhere behind the trees. Did you hear that? Aang, emerging from his meditation, asked. It's an earthbender, I responded, immediately recognizing the nature of the sound, which repeated itself. For some reason, he's throwing and hitting boulders about the size of a person against the ground. Possibly a novice, or just training. It's unlikely to be an experienced earthbender, as they don't need such training. Let's go take a look, Aang said, rushing in that direction. Wouldn't it be better not to mess with him? Sokka asked. However, everyone had already run towards the sound. Looking at Sokka, I smirked and also dashed off, noticing that he was running after me. When I reached the dry riverbed, I only saw a young man running away, covering the riverbed behind him with stones. I don't know if it was excitement, but I ran forward, leaping over Aang and Katara, who had stopped, and upon landing, I spread my arms and the earth exploded, the soil and rocks scattering in opposite directions, clearing the path and running after the earthbender, whom I could sense through his blood. I felt that the others were running after me, but only Aang, who seemed to be lying on his glider, judging by his smooth movement, could keep up with my speed. The chase didn't last very long and ended near a village where the earthbender stopped and entered somewhat calmly on foot. I stopped among the trees, looking at the village. Understanding the situation dawned on me. The guy was practicing earthbending outside the village, trying not to arouse any suspicion, and ran as soon as he realized he was spotted. It involuntarily reminded me of my own childhood. Aang landed nearby, and soon the others caught up. We can buy food here, Aang exclaimed and headed into the village, followed by Katara after a second's delay, and then Sokka, who stopped and looked at me. Frio, are you alright? He asked. Go ahead, Sokka, I'm in E. After looking at me for another second, Sokka turned and followed the others. I also made my way into the village. Soon we reached the market, where I sensed the same earthbender. Having felt his blood once, I could now easily distinguish it among the vast variety of blood from all the people here. The sense of blood came from one of the houses. Approaching the house, I opened the door and entered, immediately seeing the young earthbender and a woman he was talking to. Seeing me, his eyes widened. Don't worry, kid, I won't tell anyone. And I'll try to make sure the guys who spotted you won't tell either, I immediately said, calming the boy. What is he talking about, Haru? The woman asked the boy. I don't know, Mom, he probably made something up and now believes it himself. I met them while I was walking in the forest and then came here, and they made up their own story. At that moment, the rest of the group entered the small shop, prompting me to immediately address them. Guys, not a word about what you saw to anyone. Got it? I asked. Yes, but why? Aang asked, blinking frequently. It doesn't matter. I'll tell you later. Haru, that's your name, right? Sorry to disturb you, we'll be leaving now. Take care. I turned to leave the shop, not wanting to stress Haru further, but there was a knock at the door. Sokka immediately rushed to the window and peeked through the blinds to see who had come. It's the Fire Nation soldiers, he announced, causing everyone to become slightly more agitated. Haru's mother approached the door and opened it. What do you want? I've already paid the taxes, she said sternly. The taxes have doubled, said the entering firebender. He was a plump man with long mustaches, dressed in the full attire of the Fire Nation soldiers but without a helmet. You wouldn't want a fire, would you? You know, controlling fire can be so difficult. As he spoke, flames ignited between his hands, but he extinguished them by the end of his threat. No. Of course not. Right away. Haru's mother went behind the counter, took out a box, opened it, and handed over all the money to the firebender, keeping only the copper coins for herself. You can keep the coppers, she said as the firebender quickly left the shop, and she began picking up the coppers he had discarded on the floor. What a friendly guy! And how long have the Fire Nation soldiers been here? Sokka asked. Meanwhile, I wasn't listening and had followed the firebender out of the shop. I wasn't going to let such a bastard live. So, I needed to find out where he was staying. After trailing the soldiers at a distance, I figured out where they were staying and where this specific firebender was living. Then, I returned to the shop to find Sokka waiting for me. Frio, where did you disappear to? They agreed to let us stay the night, Aang went to get Appa, and Katara went to see where we'd be sleeping, and you just vanished. I had to take care of something important, Sokka. What could possibly be so urgent here? It's our first time in this place. It's important, Sokka. Very important, at least to me. We waited about 20 minutes for Aang and Katara. Katara returned first, and a few minutes later, Aang arrived. He explained that he went to notify Appa that he'd call him soon and that he has a special whistle for that. The whistle emits frequencies either too high or too low for human ears, but Appa can hear it from a great distance. Together, we headed to a small house with a barn on the outskirts of the village. As we approached, Haru came out to meet us. My mom said you could stay the night, but she said you have to leave in the morning. We understand, I spoke up, being the eldest. We'll leave in the morning and continue our journey. Haru went back into the barn, followed soon by Katara. Aang started meditating with a cup of water, while Sokka lay down on the hay to sleep. I sat down and began meditating next to Aang, focusing not on water, but on air. A few hours later, I sensed Aang stop his meditation and go somewhere, later felt Katara and Haru returning, then Aang came back, and eventually, everyone went to sleep, and I was left undisturbed. I woke up early in the morning while it was still dark and cool outside, but I didn't pay much attention to it, starting my morning training. I hadn't practiced for a couple of weeks, and I needed to fix that. Bloodbending allows, of course, to keep the body from losing form, more precisely slows down this process significantly, but it's not a cure-all. When the sun had risen, I finished and went to a water pump, from which I drew some water with waterbending and washed myself completely. Against the backdrop of dawn, I noticed Haru's mother. She was standing and looking into the horizon. Approaching her, I touched her shoulder. Is everything all right? I asked. She turned to me, and I saw tears in her eyes. Haru, they took him. Chapter 22, It's my fault, Katara confessed, having learned about the incident. Yesterday, I convinced Haru to use his earthbending to save an old man trapped under rubble from a collapsed mine. And that old man told the Fire Nation soldiers about Haru. I stood at the entrance to the barn, watching this scene unfold, while contemplating what to do. Ideally, we should just move on, but I felt sorry for Haru. No, it wasn't that I had grown particularly fond of him, but he reminded me of myself and my brother. He did exactly as we did, trying to train his bending in secret. Our initial circumstances were somewhat different. However, he still reminded me of us, and I couldn't shake off that thought. Ah, to hell with it! I shouted, kicking a stone. Unintentionally using earthbending, I launched it flying at high speed. Wait here! I wasn't sure if they would listen, but I had things to do. Rushing back to the village, I reached the house where I had tracked the Fire Nation soldiers. The door was locked, but I didn't need it opened. Standing a few meters away from the door, I stomped on the ground and tore a boulder from the earth, which I hurled at the door. It was metal, and the stone, not thrown with much force, only left a dent. I had launched 2 more stones when the door finally opened, and Fire Nation soldiers and benders came rushing out. "Give me back my father! You took him! Return him!" I yelled, but Fire Nation soldiers quickly approached me, grabbed my arms, twisted them behind my back, and prevented me from moving. Well, well, well. Another earthbender. Perfect, the ship is about to sail, you'll be joining your father very soon. I hung my head low as they led me away to a building, gave me a brown robe, and then took me to the docks. There, 5 other people in similar robes were waiting. Without much delay, I, along with the other earthbenders, as I understood them to be, were taken aboard the ship. The journey was short, and in about an hour and a half, we disembarked onto a sort of barge or platform, where we were met by what seemed like an honor guard led by an officer, distinguishable by his uniform, which was significantly different from the soldiers, and I had met officers before to recognize them on sight. "Dear Earthbenders, you are now prisoners of my prison. But, you know, I prefer to think of you not as prisoners but as honored guests in my house, where I, as a gracious host, welcome you. And naturally, all I require is your respect and honor in return. I do hope we understand each other." We were led across the metal barge station to a large metal wall, through gates we passed. Along the way, the warden continued to speak. "As you might have noticed, this entire place is made of metal, and the nearest land is many miles away, so attempting to escape is futile. Now, make yourselves at home." With these words, we were taken through the open passage. On the other side of the wall was a wide open space that led directly into the ocean, where many people were gathered. Quickly scanning the crowd, I approached a person I recognized. "Hey, Haru, how's life treating you? Enjoying the resort?" I asked the young man. He turned around sharply and stared at me with wide eyes. "You," was all he could ask. "Yes, me. Sorry I never got around to introducing myself. My name is Frio, and I've come to save you all." "Seriously?" he asked, skeptical. "Well, to be honest, I came here just for you, but nothing stops me from helping the other prisoners. For company's sake, you might say. I didn't expect this from you. Believe me, Haru, this is the first, no, the 3rd time in my life I've done something out of a sense of duty, showing my slight altruism. So, I suggest you take advantage of my current mood and listen to me. Now, introduce me to the leader here if you've already met him. I need to ask him something." Haru nodded. "Of course, let's go." We approached a small group of prisoners. Among them stood out an old man of large build, with thick gray hair and an even thicker beard. "Meet Frio, this is my father. He has been here for many years. Pleased to meet you. It seems you hold some authority among the prisoners? That's good, because could you ask everyone to gather together? Hello. You must be one of Haru's new friends he mentioned." "Yes, people tend to listen to me here, but I have no real power, so I can't give orders." "I'm not asking you to order anyone around. How you gather everyone in one place is of no concern to me. But it's important for their own safety and well-being. Understand me correctly, I came here as an earthbender, though born a waterbender, to free Haru. However, seeing you all here, I thought I might free you as well. But I won't overly exert myself. Meet the minimum requirements, and by this evening, you'll be on land, not in the middle of the ocean. But will you have enough strength?" "You are." The elder began, but I cut him off. "I seem to have luck with elders lately. I'll have enough strength. This vessel is in the ocean. And I'm a waterbender. Well, there are some complications. But you needn't worry about that. Why gather everyone in one place, though? It will upset the warden. I want to protect you from a stray spark." I moved closer to the edge of the metal barge, closer to the water, and waited, watching the unfolding events. Meanwhile, Haru's father went from one prisoner to another, whispering something to them. Haru did the same on his side. Gradually, people began to move towards me, stopping close by. I glanced at the wall where the Rebenders and the warden were. He looked on, frowning slightly but not intervening. In his view, there was no danger here. After all, earthbenders without earth are helpless, as Rebenders believe. And waterbenders without water. Only I had already disproved this notion once, having escaped from a prison that was supposedly perfect for containing a strong and experienced waterbender. Soon, all the prisoners were roughly in one spot. It would be easier for me this way. Haru and his father approached me under the gaze of everyone else. Frio, what now? And now? I closed my eyes, concentrated, and spread my arms with palms up. Though I train in gesture-free bending, these parasitic movements sometimes help with concentration, making the task easier. Wait here! With those words, a huge column of water rose from the ocean, arched over us 20 meters high, and EW straight towards us. But instead of crashing down on people and metal, it hit an invisible dome that quickly enveloped everyone, then rapidly turned into ice. The ice's thickness grew from the still-coming ocean water, stopping only after reaching a 2-meter-thick dome. Without another word, I walked towards one side of the dome and passed through the ice effortlessly, which instantly turned to water around me and then were frozen behind me. I emerged from the ice to find the firebenders and soldiers, led by the warden, ready for battle. So, you're not an earthbender, planning an escape? And what now? There are 30 benders here and over 100 soldiers. Think you can handle that? The warden asked with a smug smile. Once, a far greater number of benders and soldiers were sent after me, but, as far as I know, barely 15 people survived out of the 250 who came. Why do you think you'll succeed where a much larger force failed? The warden's face lost its smugness, his hands dropped slightly, and now he looked at me with fear in his eyes. Chch Kamami Monsuda, he asked with a trembling voice. Oh! So that's how I'm known to you. The blood monster. Well, not bad. I like it. But enough talk. I raised my hand, and the warden was lifted into the air, standing at attention, before his arms were twisted at unnatural angles. A slight movement of my fingers, and the sound of multiple bones breaking echoed through the warden's body. You know, a human body contains about 206 bones. Just now, your chief felt what it's like to break 120 of them in an instant. Hehehe. It's quite strange from the outside looking in that you're not even trying to attack. But I understand. This happens sometimes when people witness extreme cruelty towards someone close to them, a good friend, or a leader. You involuntarily project all the pain they're experiencing onto yourself, and it paralyzes you. His pain was more than enough for me, as you see, to explain all this, and only after a few seconds will the first of you start to attack me. As I finished my sentence, the first firebender launched a fireball at me, followed by several more in quick succession. This acted as a trigger, and the other firebenders began to hurl their fireballs at me continuously. However, a bit of ice flowed towards me and shielded me, and in the next second, I charged at maximum speed towards the nearest firebenders. The fireballs EW passed me, and those meant to hit were either deflected or met with ice. Reaching my first victim, I swung my hand and, within a second, the bender was cleaved in two, bleeding profusely. The warden's body, still under my control, was thrown at the nearest firebenders, knocking them down unexpectedly. I reached the second bender. He extended his ST and unleashed a continuous stream of fire at me, but water encased me in a cocoon, shielding me from the fire. I fell and slid on the metal right to the bender's feet. A heel strike and the sound of a breaking kneecap. Rising to my feet, I sent a couple of dozen ice spikes at the soldiers with a kick, thinning their ranks by another handful. A control heel strike to the nose of the fallen bender drove his nasal bones into his brain, killing him. The soldiers gathered more tightly, understanding they were easy prey alone, with benders stepping forward to protect them, but I'm still not great at this, but I couldn't pass up such an opportunity. Encased in ice armor, I ran straight at the defending firebenders, ignoring the flames, constantly using bending to maintain the ice's low temperature. Reaching them, all the ice on me turned to water and surged towards a bender, encasing him and providing me a foothold. With one step, I climbed onto the ice. With another I stepped on the bender's head, pushed off, and heard the crunch of his neck breaking as I soared high above the soldiers. Smiling, I concentrated, and flames ignited in my hands. Another moment in the air, and a massive wave of fire engulfed the closely gathered soldiers. Landing among the soldiers, I continued to unleash fire in all directions. Guided by my blood sense, I grabbed people and pulled them into the fire, where they began to scream in agony, and the deck echoed with the cries of those burning alive. The fire dispersed, not without the help of the surviving firebenders, and I could see the current situation. Only 13 benders remained, and about 20 soldiers, no more, the rest either dead or now burning and suffering in the flames. Well, guys, things don't look so rosy now, do they? I asked the survivors. I could literally feel their fear of me. Don't worry, you'll soon follow them. I gathered all the blood spilled on the deck and extracted it from the dead bodies, forming it into a sphere above me. With a forward stick of my hand, the blood turned into several tendrils, spiraling at high speed towards the firebenders and soldiers. But all my plans were disrupted by the sudden arrival of Aang from above, who, with a swing of his staff, created a powerful air wave that knocked down and swept away the bloody tendrils. Frio! Stop! There's no need to kill anyone. Aang shouted, with Appa landing somewhat behind him. From there, overlooking the battlefield, Katara appeared to be on the verge of sickness, and Sokka looked visibly disturbed. Aang! Stay out of this. This isn't your concern. I yelled back at him. Actually, it was the perfect moment for the firebenders to attack the Avatar, but none of them even considered it. No! This is our concern too. Stop, Frio. You've already killed so many. Doesn't that bother you at all? Me? Bothered by killing? Aang, over the years, killing has become as natural to me as using airbending is for you. I don't kill without reason. These firebenders held the earthbenders prisoner here, on these metal plates. Do you think they deserve to live? Don't interfere, for your own good. Frio, please, calm down. Katara cried out to me. I am calm. Completely. But I don't understand why Aang fails to see that we're at war, after all. Those benders and soldiers behind you are enemies. And it's customary to kill enemies in war. We're not going to kill anyone. Aang aimed his staff at me. Is that so? I asked, looking at the others. Sokka drew his boomerang, ready to throw it at me. Looks like we won't come to a peaceful agreement, then I'll end this quickly. Raising my hand, I concentrated. For a few seconds, nothing happened, but then I clenched my ST and all the benders simultaneously clutched their chests, feeling immense pain as their hearts burst. I directed my hand towards the remaining soldiers, focusing on their blood, but got distracted. Frio! No! Aang ran towards me. With a bit of concentration. Aang was also lifted into the air. I didn't plan to kill him, so I simply took control of his blood, which was much easier and faster than rupturing the heart. The Fire Nation soldiers scattered, but within the cones of the wall and a bit beyond, they couldn't hide from me. Again, I was forced to divert my attention, creating an ice wall to protect myself from Sokka's thrown boomerang. I focused on one of the soldiers and clenched my ST. Another corpse. Suddenly, my strength started to drain at an alarming rate. Looking at the only one I was constantly expending energy on, namely Aang, I saw him in a new form. Aang, suspended in the air, now radiated immense power. His eyes, wide open at this moment, shone with a white light, and along with them, his arrow tattoos also glowed with the same light. And from him, I felt an overwhelming force that literally suppressed everything. Damn it. The blood control slipped away. I simply couldn't maintain control over his blood. Realization that I was in trouble came instantly, and now I focused on Aang. Doubtful he still considered me a friend at this moment. A powerful air blast aimed at me, which I barely dodged, but saw the aftermath. The blast stripped the metal sheets from the barge and carried them far into the ocean. Stabilizing my stance, I controlled water and sent icy needles towards Aang, which he immediately controlled and sent back at me. I took control of them again, steering them behind me, and followed with a powerful fire stream, immediately sending a small, 2-centimeter steam ball behind it. Aang dispersed the fire, but the steam ball successfully hit his face and exploded on impact. This time, the attack was successful, and Aang was forcefully blown away by the explosion, clearly against his will. But he didn't land. He was surrounded by a sphere of rapidly spinning air that kept him aloft. Aang looked at me with his glowing eyes, directing his left palm towards me, and with his other hand, he made a circular motion and smoothly ran it along his extended arm. Instantly, a stream of air EW towards me, sweeping away everything in its path: bodies, blood, water, weapons. Everything! Quickly adapting, I created ice mantis-like blades from water, which I used to pierce the metal plates and anchor myself, feeling almost immediately the force nearly ripping my arm off due to the sudden pull. This ice, the only thing keeping me from being blown into the ocean, as the rest of my body flailed in the direction of the powerful wind. However, this didn't last long. Ignoring the hurricane wind he himself had created, Aang appeared beside me, his face twisted in anger, and created fire in his hand, which he immediately hurled at me. The first hit targeted the icy anchorage, shattering it instantly, and then a second blow struck my chest. I was swept away by both the impact and the wind, enduring severe strain and pain from the hit, and my arm was severely affected. After such a rapid and brief battle with the Avatar, I simply had no strength left. My head spun, and my vision was filled with colorful circles, indicating several broken ribs, a severe and extensive burn. I couldn't think further. The ocean's surface approached. I didn't even have the strength to soften my landing. The impact, and then darkness, the young man's body, with a huge burn and blood flowing from his mouth, slowly sank under the water. He was drowning, unconscious. His face submerged under water, and air from his mouth and nose began to escape upward in bubbles. Subsequent searches by the revived Avatar and his friends yielded nothing. They couldn't dive under the water to continue the search. Meanwhile, the body they were looking for hung suspended underwater. It was very deep here, deep enough that nothing could be seen. Light didn't reach this depth. Time passed, and nothing happened. This could have been the end of the story of Frio, but upon closer inspection, it was evident that the burn was gone, and if someone could conduct a full examination of the body, they would notice that all the cells were in a state of complete hibernation, yet the broken ribs were healed, not even a scar remained. And in the complete darkness of the deep and cold ocean, a faint glow emanated from the body. Suddenly, in the deep ocean waters, a sound of impact was heard, followed by another. The impacts repeated over and over, and then Frio opened his eyes, with bubbles of air quickly rising from his mouth. Bubbles kept emerging from Frio's mouth and nose, but the air in his lungs never ended, completely displacing the water. He began to ascend. Chapter 23. The rest thing I felt was a pain in my eyes when I tried to open them. It felt as though needles had been stuck into them. I was incredibly thirsty, and weakness permeated my entire body. However, despite this, I was alive. Alive and relatively healthy, despite having been nearly scorched by the fire of the Avatar himself. I tried to get up, but my body was difficult to control. Lying back down, I focused on my blood and realized that my life force was critically low. But how did I know this? When did I learn to understand this very level? This thought was the last before I passed out again due to a sudden headache. In my dream, I recalled what had happened to me. I remembered how I had, in fact, died. I remember leaving my body but remaining connected to it. I remember entering the spirit world, at least that's how I imagined it. I remember living in that world. In the spirit world, everything was completely different. My bending didn't work at all there. I had to watch, learn to live and survive all over again. And this world was filled not only with kind and neutral spirits but also with very evil ones, or just those angered by something. And there I learned a lot of new things. And I learned a lot. Time there, as I understood, owed completely differently. How long had I been there? I couldn't answer that question. It was hard, almost impossible, to differentiate between day and night and any other markers. And then I felt that my body was dying. All this time I had been sustaining it. Maybe involuntarily, but I used water healing, conserved the body's resources as much as possible, even put the body into a state similar to hibernation. However, it wasn't enough, and I was dying. But I didn't want to die. Through the connection, I managed to return to my body. A body that was somewhere in the deep waters. And it's a wonder that she and other predators hadn't eaten me. I returned to the body. It immediately began to emerge from the state of hibernation, and I felt an urgent need for oxygen. All its reserves in the body had run out, and I was on the brink of death primarily for this reason. And here, for the first time, I used what I had learned in the spirit world. Not learned, but rather understood. Understood that, just as fire is created by chi energy, so can all other elements. Precisely, a bender of any element can create their element, it's just simplest with fire and lightning. I grasped the entire process, understood and accepted it, when observing the spirits. I understood why my bending was ineffective there, precisely, it didn't work at all. All four elements remained in the material world, not in the spirit world. And so, the only way to use these elements in the spirit world is to create them. And all the spirits materialize their element from bending, rather than using one that's already present. Those among them who use elements at all. Through long observation of the spirits, and then studying several that I had defeated, I was able to grasp the process of creating an element. It hardly differs from the process of creating Re. It's a bit more complicated to create air, even more difficult to create water, and earth is the most challenging. This is the order of complexity in materializing the elements. And knowing the entire process fully, understanding it completely, having returned to the body, I directed all my chi into my lungs, where I began to materialize air. Success. And then I woke up again. This time, I fully remembered my long life in the spirit world. I don't know exactly how long, but it was definitely a long time. Long enough to master the element of air to a minimal extent. Sufficiently so to materialize this element. This was what allowed me to survive. However, could the flock of spirits that constantly used air materialization be to blame for my mastery of air? First, their life forces, and then the spiritual bodies which I consumed? This time, I acted more cautiously. Very slowly and gradually, I began to open my eyes, allowing them to adjust to the light. However, no light entered my eyes. Listening to my other senses, I realized that it was likely night. That's why the sun wasn't shining in my eyes. Listening to myself again, this time focusing on the sense of blood. Someone had taken care of me while I was unconscious and completely defenseless. The sense of blood indicated there were many people within the radius of my sensitivity. However, no one was close by. Taking this last fact into account, I materialized water in my mouth and began to drink it. Materializing and drinking. If there was anything I had learned very well in the spirit world, it was the materialization of elements. It was almost the only means of defense and attack there. If there were no natural means of attack and defense, strong muscles, sharp fangs/claws, sturdy armor, and so on. And those who lacked all this often had bending. After quenching my thirst, like after escaping from a firebender's prison, I began to control the body's absorption of the liquid. After finishing, I repeated the procedure. And again. I had to repeat this 6 times until I understood that the body's UID levels were normal and now it was time to eat well. Struggling to sit up, I tried to stand, but I couldn't, and I simply popped to the ground. Or rather, to the earth. My legs couldn't support me at all. And it seemed that to recover, my body had used all possible resources, including muscle resources. That's where it really became sad. I had worked so hard, and now it's all gone. My own body had consumed a large portion of its muscle tissue. Well, no matter. I know what my condition is at the peak of my form, so with bloodbending, I'll be able to quickly regain my shape. But for now, I'll have to use various supports for walking because I can't stand on my legs for long. However, I can't help myself. Condensing water from the air, it wraps around my limbs in thin, but not too thin, threads, starting from my fingers and covering my entire arm. A thick water rope ran along my spine, which at the bottom branched out and wrapped around my legs. A sort of water element exoskeleton. With the help of the water exoskeleton, moving became much easier, as well as standing on my feet, so I was able to more or less normally walk to the exit of the small tent where I had apparently been healing and step outside. Outside, I discovered a plethora of carts and cages, transport vans, and other tents. Everywhere there were posters, and in the cages, various animals. All of it reminded me of a circus. "You're awake!" I heard a female exclamation from my right. Turning towards the sound, I saw a woman who was now hurriedly approaching me. "Why are you standing up? You need to be lying down and resting. Go back and rest immediately." "I can't," I managed to say, forcing my vocal muscles to obey with great effort. "Want to eat. A lot. Very much. Food. You must be starving. Return immediately, lie down, and I will bring you food." "Lie down and wait," the woman looked at me sternly. How fearless. Of course, she doesn't know, but she was talking to a maniac, a killer, whose death toll had long exceeded 1,000. Although I'm physically weak, my chi strength is still with me, and at this distance, it would take only a few moments of focus to take her blood under control. Returning to the tent, I slowly made my way to the bed, more accurately a mattress on hay, where I woke up and carefully laid down again, immediately removing the water exoskeleton. It was helpful, but it also required significant concentration and energy. Fortunately, if you don't look closely, especially at night, it's completely invisible. I had created it only once before, but it was more of a hindrance then. However, as it turned out, in a situation like this bending practice can be very useful, requiring excellent control over water without any gestures, just the force of will. Soon, the woman who told me to wait in the tent came in. She had a tray in her hand with a large cup of rice, still steaming, followed by 2 children carrying baskets filled with something. The woman approached me and placed the tray with the large cup of rice next to me, and the baskets were set down on the floor next to her. "Enjoy your meal, and thank you very much." "It's me who should thank you. Judging by the state I was in when I was found, my condition was much worse. It's not certain I would have survived if not for you. And now you're giving me food. Not just the bare minimum, but enough to satisfy my hunger. You're the one who deserves thanks, not me. I won't forget your kindness. If you ever need help, reach out, and I'll assist with whatever I can." The woman smiled at my words and, looking at her children, turned back to me. "You probably don't remember us, but you saved my life and my children's when we were fleeing from the Fire Nation soldiers." I froze for a second and recalled all my encounters with Fire Nation soldiers. And one encounter indeed matched these parameters. Back then, I had just escaped from prison and was living by the shore for a while, practicing and mastering earthbending. That's when I met a mother with twin brothers, fleeing from Fire Nation soldiers. I looked at the children. Indeed, they were twins. So, that's how it was. I remember something like that. Yes. But that doesn't cancel the fact that I owe you. Thank you again. Can you tell me where we are? And where did you find me? Yes, of course. We are in a traveling circus. My children found you on the shores of a Fire Nation colony. The tide had washed you ashore while they were walking there. They recognized you immediately, though it was difficult to do so. You were very emaciated. I picked you up and started nursing you back to health, and today, you woke up. You've been here for about a week now, moving with us. We are currently on the Fire Nation Islands. Please, don't reveal to anyone that you're an enemy of the Fire Nation. I took you in and treated you under my responsibility, and if everyone finds out that you're an enemy of the Fire Nation, it will be bad for me and the children. Don't worry, I can pass myself off as a firebender, I said, igniting a small aim on the tip of my finger, which I immediately extinguished. So, you're a firebender? The woman asked in shock. No. I am not a firebender, and I am not the Avatar, but I am highly proficient in waterbending, above average in earthbending, just beginning to master fire, and almost incapable in airbending. So, I can pass myself off as a firebender. But how is that possible? Only the Avatar. Yes, I know, we've been through this, but no, many benders have the potential, it's just difficult. Alright, I understand that you don't want me to expose you, so don't worry, I won't show any aggression. Thank you very much. May I eat now? Ah. Yes, of course. Sorry for the interruption. Here's some rice, still warm, and in the basket are fruits and vegetables, and here is dried meat. Enjoy your meal and get well soon. Thank you. The woman and her silent children left the tent, and I began to eat with pleasure, helping my body absorb the food with maximum benefit. I need to regain my form. And then become even better. The Avatar clearly showed me that true power is still very far away from me. And I have only taken the rest of the steps. Chapter 24, the latest pirouette ended with a landing on my feet. I wasn't sweating, though I was breathing rapidly, each breath spreading a weak tremor and a wave of warmth throughout my body. The oxygen content in my blood was now increased, firstly due to the oxygen I materialized directly in my lungs, separate from the rest of the air I breathed, and secondly because my blood began to absorb and retain much more oxygen per unit of this precious UID. I think, if the weather were cooler, steam would probably be coming off me. Shedding excess body heat into the surrounding environment significantly increases efficiency, as does oxygenating the body. Significantly improved control over my metabolism and bodily processes allows me to advance much faster. Regaining my former physical condition didn't take much time, 2 weeks, after which I started to improve my physical condition and practice bending. In the latter, I worked by myself, as replicating the tricks of the fire performers without teachers was relatively simple after I managed to get a good handle on controlling flames. Creating fire in huge volumes turned out to be very simple. In the spirit world, this was more difficult, but here, away from the circus, creating fire resulted in a wave of aim that scorched many meters of ground, leaving it charred and black. The main goal of my training now was to bring fire under control. It always sought to break free, and holding it was difficult. Perhaps all firebenders face such issues, but they gain control over fire from childhood, subsequently facing no problems with it. Or perhaps it's even simpler, most firebenders use their bending to create flames and hurl them at their enemies in one form or another. They don't aim to maintain and control fire. Maybe this is what distinguishes masters from ordinary firebenders. Releasing lethal fire charges at an opponent and holding it for a while I can do, but after some time, it gets out of control, as if I tire. My hands tremble, and I feel weakness in my body, not physical. Another kind, perhaps spiritual, but weakness nonetheless. So, at that moment, I could use fire, but freely manipulating it was beyond my abilities. Meditation and constant training aimed for full control over fire. I wanted to take power into my hands, to subdue it completely, without any conditions. And finally, I succeeded. It was somewhat similar to Earth. Only with it, there was a limitation on the volume of impact, while with fire, the limitation was on control. However, something happened again, and they suddenly became obedient, like a loyal dog. I realized this after the very first aim I created in my hand. It felt as if before, I was using someone else's fire, not my own, a fire that belonged to someone else. As if they didn't want to submit to me. But by morning, the aim became mine. As soon as the fire appeared in my hand, I knew that this fire was now mine. Then, after a few training sessions, I was able to replicate the circus Airbender's tricks, such as the fire whip, fire ring, fire wall, and a couple of other tricks. All of this seemed more like spells to me than tricks. The fire ring, for example, should lose stability once it gets out of control and disintegrates, but no, it continues to and, with good technique, can even cut through stone, and so can the fire whip and lash. A firewall can burn and hold for a very long time. Ideally, everything should work exactly like that. And that's exactly how I learned to do everything. The main challenge in this endeavor was making the fire do unnatural things. For example, burning on water. Physical development was harder. Specifically, everything was as usual, but unexpectedly, I found someone with whom I could train. And train much more effectively. Suffice it to say, I was incredibly exhausted after our sessions. Only water baths and bloodbending with control over bodily processes helped. I even came up with and implemented the technique for oxygenating my body just to keep up with my partner. Specifically, my training partner. The unparalleled acrobat and gymnast, the incredible Tai Li. It all started when she began to watch my own training sessions. "Where did you learn that?" she asked me, standing on a tightrope that, among other things, supported the tent, when I finished training one day and was heading to the dining area, wanting to eat. I was dedicating a lot of effort and time to my body and its development, requiring resources. A lot of resources. I assisted my body in returning to the peak of my physical capabilities in the shortest time possible through control over my bodily processes, but that was only because I had reached this level before and knew how to get there, so I was pushing my development with the strongest nudges. But upon reaching this level, to put it bluntly, I didn't know in which direction to push my development further. From that moment, I could only train and let my body develop as it needed, careful not to mess anything up with my clumsy hands. However, I could significantly speed up the processes occurring within the body, allocate more resources and time to some processes, and slow down others as much as possible. This allowed for several times faster development of the body. With the technique of oxygenating the body and shedding excess heat into the surrounding environment, I reached a whole new level, only slightly lagging behind Tai Li in speed, agility, reaction, and so on. Except in physical strength, I surpassed her. I picked up some things from others, learned some on my own. "And you?" I asked. "It looks beautiful," Tai Li said, jumping off the rope and, after doing a couple of somersaults, landed on the ground. She then walked on her hands towards me, bending her legs at the knees above herself, seemingly without any discomfort. "I'm Tai Li, and you?" "I'm Garo." "Listen, are you okay walking like that? Doesn't anything hurt? Don't your limbs fall asleep? Don't you get dizzy?" I couldn't help but ask. "No. Don't you get tired of always training alone here?" she asked again, still on her hands but now on her elbows for more support. "I've been training like this for a long time, so I'm used to it. Will you teach me how to do it too? Walk on hands? It's simple. Just stand on your hands and go." Wow, with such an explanation, anything seems simple and not at all difficult. Just take it and do it. Well, yes. Just try it, that's all. Okay. Heeding her advice, I bent over and tried to stand on my hands, but I applied too much force when pushing off the ground with my feet and ended up crashing onto my back. PFF ha ha ha. Tai Li burst into laughter. That's what happens when you try something for the first time in front of someone. End up being laughed at, a lot of them. "Oh, come on, watch and learn how to do it right," Tai Li said, falling to the ground from laughter and curling up into a ball, continuing to laugh until she finally stopped. At first, there were demonstrations and explanations of how to walk on hands, then I started training with her, and on the very first training session, I realized I got much more tired than on my own. That's when training with her became a regular thing. The circus didn't stay in one place, hence it being a traveling circus. It moved, and I moved with it. After I got to know the circus owner and demonstrated my skills, including rebending, he happily accepted me among the performers. Initially, I performed as a simple fire creator, showing tricks with fire combined with acrobatics. Then, after the owner noticed our training session with Ty Lee and, upon his request, we demonstrated our full training session, he suggested we perform as a duo. Ty Lee agreed immediately, and I did too, after a while. In any case, the circus now doesn't hinder my development, on the contrary, it only helps. So why not? I constantly gathered information from some circus visitors about what was happening in the world and learned interesting news. The Fire Nation attempted to capture the Northern Water Tribe, but their entire fleet was destroyed after the Avatar's intervention. These news are important because they show how weak I am. Before, I only understood that Aang was stronger than me. But I didn't even know the approximate levels of his strength. I just couldn't compare his power to anything. In the spirit world, I also encountered many beings, even those not wielding elemental bending but something completely different, yet much stronger than me. And now, I can at least gauge the Avatar's strength. A fleet. When I can destroy an entire battle fleet, then I can hope for a comparison of our strengths. Until then, he remains stronger than me in brute force. I take this into account, so I try to gain advantages in other ways. If not strength, then diversity and mastery. Also, from the very first day I could move more or less normally, I started taking necessary actions to conceal myself. Aang is very mobile and could easily show up at the circus. Knowing him and his companion's character, the likelihood of their appearance at the circus, should they be nearby, is very high. And so, every evening, before sitting down to meditate, I slightly change my facial muscles. I add a bit here, reduce a bit there, lighten my skin tone a little. In short, I change my appearance bit by bit every day. This pace is due to several reasons. Firstly, if the changes are not big but very minor, they set in very quickly, in just 3 to 4 hours, and don't require further maintenance. Secondly, too rapid a change in appearance would be very noticeable to those I work with in the circus. Especially for Ty Lee, whom I see every day. However, gradual changes smooth out the effect, and no one notices, even though my appearance has drastically changed in just a month, and a completely different person now looks back at me in the mirror. However, no one noticed this because the process was slow. In general, I learned a long time ago to make such minor changes through controlling bodily processes, but there was never a need for it before. Now, I've found a use. Unfortunately, this won't achieve much. Only changes to facial muscles, skin color, and so on. Minor changes, nothing more, but even that is very significant. And then, a few days before the performance, a special guest paid a visit to our circus. Chapter 25, the non-stop wheel ended with my somersault, in which I flipped over Ty Lee, who was still doing her wheel. I landed and froze, feeling in my now considerably heightened zone of sensitivity and new blood that I had never encountered before. And in my time living in the circus, I had come to recognize the blood of all the people and animals living there, so I noticed the stranger immediately. "Hey, Garo, why did you stop?" Ty Lee asked, approaching me on her hands. "Someone foreign is coming. Not one of us." "Oh! Is that so?" Ty Lee responded, looking around. Out from behind the tent came, rather, a girl of 14 or 15 years old, with black hair braided into a bun, in which a clip indicating the high status of the visiting guest was placed. She was wearing the officer's uniform of the Fire Nation's benders. "Azula!" Ty Lee squealed with joy and quickly leaped to the aforementioned, grabbing her in a strong embrace. And she's a strong girl, so it was indeed a strong grip. "Hello, Ty Lee. Happy to see you. Oh, please, don't let me distract you from whatever you were doing." "Oh! Right. Azula, meet Garo, he's my performance and training partner." "Garo, meet Azula," Ty Lee whispered, "and she's a princess." "Wow! My respects, Princess Azula, It's an honor to meet a princess of the Fire Nation and, more importantly, a genius of firebending, about whom so many rumors circulate. It's said that you're no less a genius in firebending than the blood monster is in waterbending. And at your age, what will happen next? When you grow older and even stronger? I asked, pondering more to myself than to the princess, whom I remembered from memories of the prison where I had spent almost a year. I recall, my overseer, the first, told me of her genius and her element. And you know how to add her, said Princess Azula and turned to Ty Lee. Ty Lee, I don't understand what you're doing in this hole. The princess stopped, noticing my intent gaze, then looked again at me smiling. Did you want something? She asked me. Yes. Princess Azula, being a firebender myself, I ask you to allow me to have a fight with you. If you're not against it, of course. What? Ty Lee and Azula both stared at me. Garo, are you out of your mind? Ty Lee asked. Yes. I just really want to see even a bit of the genius that is praised in our princess. You're brave! Azula exclaimed loudly. All right. We'll be training Agni Kai. The smile on her face and the emotions that probably everyone around her was feeling indicated that this would not be just a training duel. Forgive me. I humbly ask you, Princess Azula, could you conduct the Agni Kai with this fool outside the circus, so as not to burn it down? The circus owner came running and almost kneeled before Azula. Yes, of course, I wouldn't want to harm my father's subjects. A few minutes later, I stood opposite Azula in the midst of trampled earth and small patches of grass, which seemed to grow in clumps. And in the distance, the rest of the circus population began to gather, including Ty Lee. Azula stood still, waiting for my attack. I also stood still, completely relaxed. Princess Azula, I don't intend to beat you, I just want to see your capabilities in combat, to understand your greatness, so could you attack first? In response, Azula smiled on one side of her mouth and made several sharp movements forward, and from her extended index and middle fingers, clusters of bright blue flames burst forth. Just seeing the blue flame, I immediately spun a fire disk with a circular motion of my hands, into which the fire clusters crashed. I spun the disk and sent it towards Azula, but she jumped up, intending to leap over it. A clap of my hands and the disk, being directly under the princess, exploded into a sphere of flame. A jet of flame of the same blue color burst out of Azula's feet, counteracting the explosive wave, and though Azula was blown away, she wasn't seriously harmed. She was falling to the ground when I quickly moved closer to her, and getting within about 7 meters, I crouched on one knee and spun on a circular axis, releasing a powerful jet of flame from my foot. Azula released fire with her hands and feet to protect herself from my aim wave, which, upon colliding with her fire, rose high up. Taking advantage of the moment while I was lost from her sight, I began to close in and simultaneously concentrated fire between my hands at one point. The wall dissipated, and as soon as I appeared in Azula's field of vision, I released the accumulated fireball, forbidding the fire to spread in any direction except towards Azula herself. The princess, although she defended herself with her fire, was still blown away by the explosion for many meters. This time, Azula couldn't land properly and fell, rolling on the ground a couple of times. I froze, waiting for her next actions. From the rumors I had gathered, more out of boredom than intention, I knew she was a very volatile personality, cruel and unable to tolerate defeats. So, perhaps, she would show me new techniques that I could try to master? I wasn't fighting her for nothing. Princess Azula slowly got up, first by pushing herself up with her hands, then getting on all fours, and from that position, she stood up. Her hair was disheveled, her clip was gone, possibly blown away by the explosion. Standing on her feet, she swayed from side to side. Apparently, the explosion had somewhat concussed her, and she was now diligently trying to regain her composure. An ordinary person would have been torn to pieces by such a concentrated fire explosion, but I had long learned that benders, especially strong ones, have particularly durable bodies. While cutting them might not be much harder than a regular person, crushing damage is significantly more challenging. So, I wasn't worried about the princess's life. In the worst case, I would experiment with transferring blood and life not into myself but into another person. This is much more complicated because I automatically consumed the stolen life and assimilated the blood, but here I would have to make the patient do it. The main thing is to have a victim and no witnesses, otherwise, there would be too many victims, even for me to consume. At this point, I could consume the life and blood of 4 benders at once, and then I would enter a several-day period of intoxication. Complete disorientation, a total shutdown of the survival instinct, and removal of all moral and logical restrictions, extreme curiosity, and hyperactivity. I was in such a state once and that was enough, so I try not to overindulge. It's good that memory remains intact after the intoxication by life ends. However, I digress. Princess Azula, it seems, had come to her senses and was preparing to continue the fight, but I called out to her. Princess Azula, I don't want to harm you, so if you wish, we can stop the fight. I have already seen your greatness. Your blue flame is much stronger than mine, and that says a lot. I couldn't finish, as a large stream of blue fire was thrown at me, but towards the direction where I had rolled, a second, much larger one was already lying. I couldn't dodge it in time, so I decided to defend. In my right hand, a flame ignited. And in my left, hidden from everyone by my body, concentrated pure oxygen, invisible to anyone. The movement and 2 hands joined, releasing a flame towards the princess's fire stream, fueled by pure oxygen. The collision of the 2 fire streams caused an explosion that spread upwards and sideways, covering a vast space and blocking my view. Using my own tricks against me? Almost. I sensed her moving upwards. Fast and steady. Was she flying? But how? Could it be on jet propulsion? Darn, and why hadn't I thought of such a simple thing, given that I had long noticed that releasing a tightly compressed and strong stream of fire from my hand, I felt resistance. Not to the movement of the fire, but to the hand. The released fire stream created a small thrust, trying to move the hand in the opposite direction. It just never occurred to me to achieve greater thrust and initiate jet propulsion. It's quite simple, either by generating more fire or by increasing the density of the released fire. Either way, under equal conditions, it would increase thrust and potentially allow me to move through the air by jet propulsion. I had already attempted. For instance, using bloodbending to make myself fly, as I had done with victims, only to find out that although possible, it was terribly unpleasant to fully control my own blood. And attempting to move in such a way caused me great pain. I suspect my victims felt the same. But again, I digress. The wall of flame only slightly dissipated. Azula was somewhere at a height of about 10 meters, and I prepared to observe a new rebending technique, ready to defend myself. However, I didn't expect that as soon as the flame cleared, I would see Azula flying on streams of highly compressed fire, surrounded by blue electric crackling and emerging glow of discharges, as a lightning bolt released by Princess Azula struck me. "Damn it!" I exclaimed, watching as Azula pointed her fingers at me and began to concentrate a large amount of fire in a cavity I had created in the ground. As soon as the lightning began to concentrate and head in my direction, slower at the beginning stages and perhaps in general than ordinary lightning, I initiated an explosion beneath my feet. The explosion threw me upwards, and at the same moment, the lightning struck the spot, blasting the ground around the impact site, literally exploding it. Wow, that's something. Real lightning. It may have moved slowly at the start, but after that, it reached the speed of standard lightning, covering the distance between Azula and the impact point instantly. My legs hurt from the explosion. I hadn't injured anything, but the small blood vessels could have burst from such a gift. Probably why I felt pain. And it must have hit the nerves pretty hard. I landed on the ground and immediately raised my hands, yelling at the top of my lungs. "Princess Azula! I surrender! Hear that? You've won! I can't fight against you!" I yelled, ready to dodge to the side from another lightning bolt at any moment. However, after a couple of seconds, Azula quickly descended and landed 2 meters away from me. "Who are you, Garo? Who taught you firebending?" Azula asked sternly, while breathing heavily with her bangs partially covering her eyes. "Princess Azula, I swear, and all the firebenders in the circus can confirm, when I first arrived here, I could barely keep her under control. Everything I can do, I learned here. In this circus. Picking up bits from other firebenders and the rest I figured out myself. However, your technique of jet propulsion has greatly intrigued me. I will definitely learn it. As well as the technique to enhance fire. Because that's why your flame is blue, right, Princess Azula?" Without responding, the princess turned around and walked away from the smiling me, heading towards the circus performers and Tai Li, who was only looking at me. It seems I somewhat shocked her, like that. I looked around. The ground exploded, dug up, melted, and the grass was completely burned everywhere. Some of it was still burning. Obeying my will, they went out. Sitting down with a satisfied smile on the still warm ground, I created fire in my hand and focused on it. Chapter 26. Everything was in the same place where, not long ago, Azula and I had fought. I sat in the lotus position, with palms facing upwards in front of me, holding a cluster of fire. However, it would be more accurate to say that the flame in my hands wasn't so much burning as it was sparking. It seemed as if tiny sparks were shooting out from the fiery mass and scattering around like reworks. Meanwhile, the fire itself did not appear ordinary. It wasn't smooth, transitioning from one form to another, constantly changing. No, it seemed like a small star scattering its rays around. I had been sitting in the same position for several hours, focusing on the fire. The fire I was trying to strengthen. And I was quite successful at it. The fire was no longer yellow as before, but red. Remembering the color gradation of flames, the most memorable to me, I recall that blue and white flames are the hottest, with a tremendous burning temperature. And yet, I can't move beyond red. Not white or blue. Red. So far, I haven't been able to take a step forward. But that's okay, I have time. The brightly shining star, whose brightness was noticeable even through my closed eyes, began to dim and soon extinguished. I continued to sit still. A thought kept hammering in my head, giving me no peace. Lightning. What is it? An electric spark discharge initiated by a potential difference, if my memory serves right. As I understand it, though I'm not a scientist, so I might not be correct, lightning is an attempt to create equality in nature. In one place, there's a lack of electrons, and in another, there's an excess of them. As a result, in an effort to establish equilibrium, the excess electrons rush from the place of surplus to the place of shortage. This movement of electrons is called lightning. But how does this work in the case of bending? How does elemental bending work, if you think about it? I hadn't really pondered this question before. Why does water bending allow one to manipulate water, preferably clean, but if you mix water with earth, you can't do anything with it, with low control? However, later, as control increases, it's not difficult to extract water even from plants, let alone from mud. The same goes for blood. Initially, I couldn't control it at all. I even intentionally bled a little of my blood into a cup and then healed the wound with water, but the blood didn't respond at all. Then I was able to start controlling the water in the blood, and that was a breakthrough. I could control living beings, like puppets. Difficult, costly, but possible. However, it still didn't give me full control over blood. Later, I began to feel and perceive blood not as a water carrier, but as a separate element. And then I was able to use the technique of blood and life stealing for the first time. This was no longer controlling blood through water, this was full control over blood as a separate element. And now, this control allows me to change my appearance to some extent. However, waterbenders can't control, for example, liquid metal, lava, they control water in its various states. Meanwhile, pure water is the easiest to control. The more impurities in the water, the harder it is to control. More precisely, the substance in general. So, a waterbender, potentially, could extend their power from pure water to a vast number of substances. But could a waterbender, for example, control liquid oxygen? And could an airbender do it? On one hand, it's a liquid. On the other hand, it's oxygen. Airbenders are somewhat more complicated. They control air, but air is a mixture of a vast number of gases in different proportions. Oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, water vapor, ozone. There are really many gases. And I don't know their proportions in this world. Nonetheless, airbenders control this mixture. And I used pure oxygen in battle, creating it underwater. But I can control the air just as easily. Does this mean that airbenders control any gases? Earthbenders are not much simpler. Even more complicated. They control the earth? But what is earth? Land, as opposed to water? Or maybe soil, the top layer of our planet's crust, the surface? Loose dark brown substance that is part of our planet's crust. After all, soil is a collection of a huge number of chemical elements. Does this mean that earthbenders control this mixture? Definitely not. Because we easily control granite and stones, and their composition differs from regular earth, like black soil. Then what the hell? What exactly does the earth element represent? Because the same lava seems like earth, but it's liquid. And neither an earthbender nor a waterbender can control it. And lightning comes into play here. It has nothing in common with fire. Well, maybe they have something in common, but they are completely different elements. Then how did Azula manage to generate, and then deliberately launch at me quite a strong lightning? These questions swirled in my head and gave me no peace. I just couldn't understand what earth, fire, air, waterbending is. Stop! I've already figured out for myself that an element is energy. Understanding this allowed me to master the 4 basic elements, not being an avatar. I synchronized my energy with the element's energy. Not with some chemical element, but with the energy contained in the earth, owing in water, raging in fire, and rushing through the air. Perhaps, if we imagine all existing elements and elements as a ring/circle, where 4 points every 90 degrees are occupied by one of the 4 elements, then we can imagine all the different elements between these elements. So, we can imagine lava somewhere between fire and earth. No. That also doesn't t. Which elements does blood lean towards, apart from water? I doubt fire, earth, or air would. So, the circle definitely doesn't work. A sphere? But what would occupy the bottom and top points of the sphere? And is something needed there? Well, let's leave the sphere for now. 4 points occupy the basic 4 elements. For types of energy, when I trained in earthbending, I realized that controlling sand is significantly harder than controlling earth. Similar to steam compared to water. But I doubt that sand can be considered a mixture of earth and some other element. Or does it air there? Earth and air equal sand? Maybe, but I have my doubts. It's more like a boundary, a subdivision of earthbending. If we imagine the same sphere, then each element has 2 paths to 2 adjacent elements. Let's use the same example with lava. This element stands on the line between fire and earth. But there are a vast number of other directions. And sand, unlike lava, is located, as it were, a bit aside from the line that connects earth and water with fire. Sand is a separate direction. Just as in water, ice or steam are separate directions, for their energy is indeed different from water itself, only ice's energy, though different, is still close to water's energy. Steam's energy is more distinct, and therefore it required more time and training for me to gain control over steam, comparable to water control. That is, it took me more time to expand the range of energy under my control. And this explains a lot. For example, why earthbenders can control both granite and other stones, and earth, and in the deserts, as I heard even before I was captured by firebenders, there are those who control sand. Simply, all of this has similar energy, but Sand's energy, although close to Earth's, still differs more significantly. And as for stone from Earth in terms of energy, if it differs, then so insignificant that earthbenders almost don't notice it. The same applies to airbenders. Perhaps different gases have different energy, but the differences are so insignificant that an airbender wouldn't even notice them. The same situation with blood. As I gained control over water and blood, I gradually stretched the spectrum of my influence on blood until I expanded it enough for blood to become a fully independent element for me. So maybe the situation with lightning is similar? Could it be a slightly different form of rebending energy? Maybe. Garo, how are you? I heard Ty Lee's voice from my right. Opening my eyes, I turned to her. She sat on the sand about 1.5 meters away from me, now without her usual joyful smile, looking at me. Oh, Ty Lee, I'm in. My legs still hurt a bit from the explosion I caused under myself, but overall, I'm great. You know as well as I do how tough I am. Yes. I know, she said softly and looked at the circus, then continued. You know, Azula and I have been friends since childhood. Even when we were studying at the same academy, we became friends. I didn't notice anything bad in your relationship when you met. Why then, having a princess as a friend, and not just any princess but in good terms, did you join the circus? And here, either no one knows you're from the aristocracy, or they just don't talk about it. I only found out today that my performance partner, an excellent acrobat and not the least of guiders, who has been living and working with the circus for a long time, turns out to be from the aristocracy. I didn't want anyone to know. Some know, but I asked them not to tell anyone. You know, my aura has become much better here, so I'm glad I did this. I see. You like it in the circus? Yeah, Ty Lee's joyful smile reappeared. At home, I had many older sisters. My parents hardly paid any attention to me, so one day I just decided to leave. And a little later, I joined the circus. Oh. So that's it. You left home in search of attention. And so you like it here? Because you are in the center of attention? Well, probably yes. Do you think that's bad? You're asking the wrong person, Ty Lee. Oh, the wrong person. Still, she turned to me and looked into my eyes. I judge quite biasly. In my childhood, my mother and brother were killed, I lost my family, so, it seems wrong to me to leave your family like that. After all, the family is the dearest thing a person has. I see, still, thank you. No problem, I got up from the cold ground and was ready to head back. After all, a princess in the circus. They might even arrange a performance just for her. She's a high flyer. Let's go back. It's going to get dark soon and cool down. Do you know why Azula came? Ty Lee asked as she stood up. It was unusual for her to get up and stand without any tricks. I stopped and, after a brief thought, turned to Ty Lee. Until this moment, I sincerely believed she just stopped by on her way to visit an old and good friend. Or even came specifically for this. But looking at you now, I'm starting to doubt that. Ty Lee approached me, and we walked to the circus together. She was silent and looked at the ground until she continued. Azula has to complete an important assignment from her father, and for this, she decided to invite me to her team. I really didn't want to leave the circus, but I remembered your fight. Were you scared? And no. Azula and I are friends, why would I be afraid of her? I see. And then? Well, in short, I agreed. Is that so? So you're leaving the circus? I felt a bit sad. Ty Lee is very cheerful and joyful. I had gotten used to training and performing with her. Without her, it wouldn't be as interesting. And what would I even do in this circus then? Only now did I realize that I had been in the circus for the last few weeks only because it was fun and interesting. And it was fun and interesting for me precisely with Ty Lee. Yes, but I also asked Azula to think about taking you with us. You're a strong firebender, and I've gotten used to you. And you know what? She asked, smiling. I can't even imagine. Enlighten me. Azula agreed. So now I'm asking you, do you want to go with us? Ty Lee walked ahead of me and stood directly in front of me, blocking my way. Quite funny, considering I'm 3 years older and, thanks to bloodbending-induced body stimulation, much taller and wider than Ty Lee. Her question became a serious reason to think. Should I go on a mission with the Fire Nation's princess? I no longer feel almost any animosity towards the Firebenders and the Fire Nation in general. Yes, they killed my family, but not everyone is to blame for that. And I've already avenged my family a long time ago. Later, I killed Firebenders and soldiers either because they attacked me or more out of inertia. You could say it became something of a bad habit. Although recently, while living among the circus, I managed to successfully suppress this bad habit. Moreover, with Azula, I could try to learn the lightning element and study her flame. On the other hand, I once embarked on a journey with one team. As a result, who knows how long I lived in the spirit world, nearly died there countless times, and upon returning to the world of the living, nearly died again. But at the same time, I couldn't learn what I wanted, healing. Alright. I'll take a chance. And I really hope I won't regret it later. I agree. Hooray! Ty Lee jumped for joy. And what's the mission? I asked. Azula told me we need to capture her uncle and brother, who have become traitors. Chapter 27. The ship sailed steadily, gently rocking on the calm water's weak waves. It's quite a soothing sight. And the sensation of rocking is also calming. What are you doing? Asked Ty Lee, approaching me. Meditating. Trying to strengthen my flame, like Princess Azula's. Oh! How's it going? Ty Lee sat down next to me. I stretch out my hand forward, and a flame of red color lights up in my palm. Wow! Your fire is red, she exclaimed. Can you make other colors? Not yet. At least, not now. I'm currently trying to achieve a greater power of the fire, its strength. And this naturally comes with a change in color. The fire in my hand immediately went out. I see, you seem to really enjoy bending, don't you? Ty Lee asked, looking away and staring at the water. Yes, I love it. I enjoy development in general. The process and the result. This applies to both bending and the body. Hey, Ty Lee, why the long face? Your joyful smile is practically the only reason I joined you, so don't deprive me of it. Whether Ty Lee understands if I'm joking or not, her mood improved. Where did you live before you ended up in the circus? She suddenly asked. Where? In a village. A small village. And then I set off traveling from a young age. Once stumbled upon a group of kids, went on a journey with them, and then one of them nearly killed me, and I was left to drown. That's how I ended up in your circus. You could say that for the last few years, I haven't lived anywhere. Though there was one place where I almost stayed for a year. A nice place, the conditions were simply splendid. Even found myself an interesting conversational partner there. That's where I learned about Azula and her genius in rebending. It's almost like my story. Hehehe. I couldn't help but laugh. Hey! What's so funny? Ty Lee hit me on the shoulder, not too hard. No, nothing funny, just comparing our stories and thinking about how similar they are. By the way, where are we sailing to now? I asked Ty Lee. We're heading to Omashu, a recently conquered Earth Kingdom city, to meet another friend of mine, Garo. Wow! You managed to capture Omashu? That's impressive. I've been to that city once and remember it, so it must have been quite a challenge. No. We hardly suffered any losses. The battle hadn't even started when that crazy king surrendered and handed over the entire city. It was an easy victory. Azula said from behind me. Ty Lee jumped at the surprise, but I sensed her arrival immediately. Is that so? I was surprised, remembering the somewhat mad earthbender leading the city. Well, that's out of the expected scenario. And how did you manage to end yourself in that city, so far from Fire Nation territories? Azula asked. You heard, I traveled, was here and there. And Omashu was one of my stops. I just wanted to buy some spices, you know, I love something spicy and hot. But I had to stay longer because someone was causing trouble. So I spent 3 days in Omashu. Interesting story, Azula said. Garo, I need a sparring partner for rebending training. You're a strong rebender, so I want you to be it. Oh, is that so? Can I refuse? I asked, just in case. Do you want to refuse? The princess raised an eyebrow. No, of course not, but I'm interested in the possibility. In that case, yes, if you wish, you can refuse our duel. Thank you. May I ask something in return? I seized the moment. HM? And what do you want to ask me? Azula inquired. Only that you train more often in using lightning and allow me to be present during it. Why do you want that? She squinted at me. I want to observe the lightning, to understand it. And you, at the moment, are the only one who can use it. All right. I'll fulfill your request. 10 minutes later, the deck was prepared for training. Everything amiable was removed, and everyone except the two of us left the deck. This time, we agreed not to use lightning, as it's an overwhelming force and defeats the purpose of rebending training. We stood still, waiting for the opponent to give up and attack first. Azula attacked first. A step forward and her hand shot forward, and when it stopped, a blue fireball ripped from her hand, aimed towards me. In response, a red fire disc threw from me, effortlessly passing through the deadly charge and heading towards Azula. Simultaneously, I sent fire streams from both hands to the sides, which, like snakes, curved and rushed towards Azula from the flanks, while a sweep of my legs sent a directly targeted fire crescent at her. The princess had not many options. The first option, a solid defense. My red flame is more powerful than the previous yellow, so it will be harder to defend against, but her blue flame is hot enough to ignite some of the surrounding air. This means she generates much more fire than the energy she puts in, allowing her to create a formidable shield against any elemental attack. Fire is not just energy and heat, it's also ionized gas. In her case, it's almost plasma. This significantly increases her combat potential, making her attacks much more dangerous, and her shield sufficiently tangible to even defend against earthbenders. Her fire can be considered more solid, which is useful both in attack and defense. A solid defense would mean the battle goes to attrition. And there, she would have the advantage. With equal amounts of generated fire, she would spend much less energy. Do I have a lot of magical energy? To be honest and without exaggeration, yes, I have a lot of energy. I don't know what played the main factor: constant training, mastering new elements, expanding the range of energies under my control, natural potential, or my meditations, or maybe all of these combined. Just at some point, comparing my powers with those of ordinary benders, even quite strong ones, I began to realize that I have much more energy than them. I would even say many times more. But does this apply to Azula? As far as I know, she has been demonstrating talent in firebending since childhood, constantly trained, and her blue flame is direct proof of that. Plus, she can bend lightning. I had never heard of such a thing before. So hoping for overwhelming power is not advisable. It may be possible, but it's a poor path of development, in my opinion. The second option for her to dodge to the side and up using jet propulsion, in which case she would avoid each attack I'm currently using, but in the air, she would become an excellent target, which would be a sin not to hit with fire clusters. There's also a third option to break through the frontal attack due to the advantage in firepower, trying to get close to me. On one hand, this is good for her, as I've never demonstrated close combat fire techniques, and she surely knows and will use them. But she's unlikely to use this method. She probably remembers the moment when we got close in battle once, and then she was significantly shaken by the explosion of a fire concentrate. Azula went for a solid defense, surrounding herself with a fire sphere that shattered all 3 of my attacks. Seeing the fire sphere, I immediately formed a fire whip in my hand. One swing and a strike. The fire from the previous attacks had not yet dissipated when the fire sphere was torn apart by the red fire whip, which wrapped around Azula. Next, it was simple. I created a powerful fire cluster in my left hand and pulled the caught princess towards me with my right. She was simply blown through in her own defense, and on the exit, she met a dense column of flame that hit her directly. Azula was knocked back and hit the ship's railing. She didn't move, but I could feel life within her. Seems like she lost consciousness. I hope she won't start considering me her personal enemy now. No, if the situation goes south, I'll quickly kill her. She won't be able to fend off bloodbending. She's not the Avatar. She should have enough strength. But for now, having friendly relations only brings benefits, so as long as that's the case, I wouldn't want to lose that advantage. Chapter 28. Much had changed in the city of Omashu since my last visit. Firstly, there were significantly fewer people on the streets. Secondly, many houses now bore red colors, with Fire Nation AGS hanging everywhere. We were greeted quite modestly by a single dark-haired girl with 2 buns on either side of her head and 2 long strands falling from her head. The soldiers carrying Princess Azula in her palanquin set it down on the ground, and the princess immediately stepped out and approached the girl greeting us. With an utterly unchanged expression, the girl bowed and then said, "I hope you've come to kill me." These words, spoken with complete indifference and a serious face, almost triggered a reaction in me, and I was indeed ready to oblige. Normally, I don't kill on request, but if asked, especially by someone from the Fire Nation, and about themselves, it seemed rude not to help. However, I stopped myself just before making a move. The girl, though, what am I saying? She looked no more than 15 years old. Ty Lee is just 14. So, in my mind, I'll refer to our greeter as a girl. So, the girl smiled at her words, and she, along with Azula, laughed. At that moment, Mai's expression was not depressive but rather joyful and happy at seeing her friend. The 2 girls joyfully hugged, and Ty Lee joined in, unable to stay away from the hugging. "I thought you had left with the circus," said Mai, as I just learned from Azula's greetings, embracing Ty Lee. "Yes, but Azula's call was louder, so I went with her. By the way, meet Mai, this is Garo, he's also going with us. In the circus, he was my performance partner, and he's a Airbender, just like Azula, and even managed to defeat her." Ty Lee cheerfully exclaimed. "Is that so?" Mai looked at me, then nodded to herself. "Understood. Pleasure to meet you, Mai. Sorry, I don't know any other way to address you, so I'll stick with this for now. If you don't like it, let me know. Ty Lee is right, I'm joining you." However, Azula didn't lose to me. It was more like she just didn't expect that much initiative from me, so it was nothing more than a mishap. "Understood," Mai said with her indifference returning, then turned and addressed everyone. "Let's go. I'll take you to my father." Soon we were in the spacious office of the governor. Princess Azula took his place, with Mai, Ty Lee, and I standing by the sides. The first 2 simply stood and waited, while I stood slightly aside, trying not to be too noticeable, and there, with my eyes closed, I focused on the earth and stones around us. Being in what could be considered Azula's entourage, I couldn't practice the overt bending of other elements. Only fire. I had already established myself as a firebender, and suddenly showing abilities in other elements might lead them to think I was the Avatar. Right now, I don't need complications. Besides, in rebending, I could not just practice, but significantly improve. Azula is known as a rebending prodigy. She might lack combat experience, but she compensates with rebending techniques and sharp intellect. Combat experience can be acquired over time. And from her, especially, I could learn a lot. In our training battles, she constantly invents new things or significantly improves on existing techniques. Thus, my training fights with her actually increase her threat level. But the same applies to me. Firebending was perhaps the most challenging element for me. Perhaps it's due to my innate affinity for water, or something else, but the invisible resistance I felt was overcome, and now it's second only to water in terms of development. Earth and air follow, with air being the least developed. I mainly used it as a fire enhancer or an oxygen enrichment techniques with bloodbending. However, I believe neglecting the other elements and their development would be unwise. And if I can't develop their external forceful applications, who's to stop me from developing subtle and ideally unnoticed techniques? When I mastered bloodbending, I used it almost exclusively as a means of killing or controlling opponents. Later, I discovered its capabilities in body control but didn't devote much time to it. But, imprisoned without the ability to practice external applications, I focused entirely on internal control. And after years, this subtle, unnoticed influence allowed me to change my appearance, control almost all processes in my body. In other words, unable to develop in strength, I devoted all my attention to another direction of development. So why not try to do the same here? Why not attempt the same with earthbending? I may have achieved high results in forceful earthbending, at least by my assessment, but that's it. I could try to train in creating detailed stone figures, but that's too conspicuous. So, I came to new conclusions. Bloodbending allows me to sense life in living beings, in their blood. So perhaps, based on other elements, I could attempt some form of sensory ability? Vibrations transmit much better in water and earth, being denser mediums, and air excellently carries smells and sounds. Maybe there's a way to use this? I started with earth. It's the most accessible element for developing sensory abilities, excluding air, which I barely developed, a matter to be corrected. Somehow, find a way to discreetly train in this bending, practice it, and not draw attention. Hey, Garo, why are you frozen? Did you fall asleep? Ty Lee's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Chapter 29. Oh, sorry. Have you finished the meeting already? I missed everything. Can you lean on what was discussed? I asked, noticing that almost everyone had dispersed, and Azula and Mai were walking away, discussing something. Sure. Mai's younger brother has been kidnapped, and the governor wants to exchange King Bumi for his son. The four of us, me, Azula, Mai, and you, will go to the exchange. It will take place at the construction site where a statue of the Fire Lord is being built. Understood. Shall we take a walk around the city? I didn't get to explore much last time, maybe we'll find something interesting. Let's do it! It was still daytime, so we walked the streets of Omashu, or rather, as Ty Lee told me, thanks to Azula, this city is now called New Ozai, in honor of her father. Almost no residents remained in the city. As it turned out, they all left the city just a day before our arrival. However, those who stayed were mostly food and goods shop owners. They hadn't noticed much change. Fire Nation soldiers didn't bother them much, goods like theirs are needed by everyone, so they felt relatively safe. We stocked up at some of these shops and happily ate as we walked the streets. I hadn't tried the city's culinary works last time, only tasting a sweet crystal. Now, I made up for it, devouring sweets and baked goods with Ty Lee from the stalls. When the sky began to color with sunset hues, we headed back and dispersed to our rooms. The night was, as usual, sleepless for me. Instead, I sat on the floor meditating, but instead of focusing on elements and energy, I tried to concentrate on the earth as a whole entity, trying to filter out all stimuli except for earth vibrations. In some ways, the earth is always vibrating, but human senses aren't developed enough to feel it. I only felt the vibrations towards morning. It felt like a constant hum that I sensed with my entire body. Not solely on my own. The sensations were amplified and primarily perceived through earthbending, and this information was then projected into my mind. For 10 minutes, I concentrated, trying to discern anything in the earth's hum, but without success. I ended the session, preparing for the exchange happening today. Chapter 29. Every face is familiar, I thought, looking at the trio of kids I knew. In front of our group, comprising me, Ty Lee, Azula, and Mai, stood the trio of Aang, Katara, Sokka, and Mai's younger brother in the latter's arms, though we won't count him for now. We stood on the planks of the construction scaffolding where a statue in honor of Ozai, the current Fire Lord, was being erected. The site was massive, at least 100 meters long, with no cover to be found. Above us, Bumi was being held in a metal coffin suspended by a chain from a metal crane. His laughter, tinged with a hint of madness, echoed around us and was clearly audible to me. The metal coffin, with only a hole for the face, was lowered and placed right behind us, and for a few seconds, silence spread across the area. "Where's my brother?" Mai calmly asked the group with Aang. "He's here," Aang replied. "We're ready for the exchange." "Excuse me," Azula interjected, addressing Mai. "An idea just occurred to me. Do you mind?" "Of course not, Princess Azula," Mai responded indifferently, showing no emotion. "We're exchanging a 2-year-old infant for a king." "A powerful king of the earthbenders," Azula said, looking at Bumi, who nodded with a smile, and then Azula turned back to Mai. "It seems to me this is not an equal exchange, is it?" Mai looked at Azula, then shifted her gaze to her 2-year-old brother. "You're right," she said and walked forward, but stopped after a few steps. "There will be no deal." With those words, she raised her hand, and the crane began lifting Bumi's coffin back up. "Oh ho ho, see you soon." Bumi laughed joyfully, his voice carrying to all who could hear. "Bumi!" Aang shouted and dashed forward with great speed, kicking up a huge cloud of dust behind him. Princess Azula immediately sent a large red ball at Aang, but he leaped 7 meters high, momentarily dumbfounding the princess. However, a stream of fire dense in the air and curving, knocked the avatar out of his uncontrollable leap, burning part of his clothes in the process. "Princess Azula, don't just stand there," I yelled, grinning and watching Aang get up, playing with fire in my hand. Oh, what pleasure I felt at that moment, giving Aang a little fire tap. "The avatar!" Azula exclaimed, realizing whom she had encountered. "My luck today!" Azula charged forward towards Aang, hurling fireballs at him on the run. However, some of them were neutralized by Katara's ice projectiles, deftly managing water on the move. It seemed she learned well in the north. Unlike Aang, Katara and Sokka, carrying Tom Tom, ran in the opposite direction. Ty Lee and Mai followed them, while I, like Azula, ran towards Aang. The avatar quickly recovered and leaped to his feet, dodging Azula's fire wave, but then had to create a powerful airstream to deflect my flame attacking him. I rushed at him under the cover of Azula's constant fire attacks and upon catching up, attempted a kick, which was softened by an air cushion and blocked with his staff. But Aang was just a 12-year-old kid, and I was significantly heavier, so even such a hit sent him sliding across the boards. I felt Azula leap over me and saw a blue stream of flame hitting Aang, who jumped far to the side, but couldn't land properly because I simply lit the boards beneath him on fire, sending a fireball at him with a second movement. An air sphere protected Aang from the fireball itself, but when it was a meter away from him, I mentally commanded it to explode. Aang was blown off the edge of the construction scaffolding, and I immediately made a couple of gestures to extinguish the fire. No point in damaging state property. They might start blaming me for something later. Azula went after Aang, and I turned my attention to Ty Lee and Mai. At that moment, Katara simply threw Ty Lee off the scaffolding through one of the holes and protected herself from several of Mai's accurately thrown dart needles, which hit the planks turned by Katara from the construction. That's when I decided to get involved. Fireballs hit Katara, then she had to create an ice wall to protect herself from a stream of fire. Mai, carefully avoiding my fire, got closer to Katara, but at that moment, Ty Lee appeared behind Katara. I stopped the ring to avoid hitting Ty Lee. Ice obscured the view and didn't allow me to see what was happening, but judging by what I felt, Ty Lee was now using her abilities to block bending. More accurately, it wasn't even abilities, just a good knowledge of acupuncture for both non-benders and benders. The ice wall melted just 2 seconds before I reached it. Ty Lee jumped back, and Katara was dazed from the loss of her bending control. Oh yes, I understand those feelings. I myself was in such depression and shock when I learned that my bending could be blocked, even without being a bender. This was one of the reasons I wanted to train with Ty Lee. I was very interested in this. And then I had to try hard to make it so that my bending couldn't be blocked in such a way. I haven't completely succeeded yet, but there are successes in this direction, and that's the main thing. However, my first reaction was no different from Katara's, and there was a chance to use this. I quickly approached and delivered a maximum strength punch to her solar plexus. Crushing blows are maximally ineffective against benders, but you can hit such weak spots in the body as the solar plexus. Such a hit can even deprive a bender of breath, if hit hard enough. I hit hard enough, hopefully not too much. Katara doubled over and gasped for air, while I grabbed her arm, twisted it behind her back, and held her in a dangerous position. A sharp move and she'd dislocate her own shoulder. And if I try a bit harder, I could even break her arm. Both are terribly painful, something I've come to know in my life. I didn't always come out of fights with the Fire Nation intact. Only water and its healing saved me. At that moment, I sensed the approach of Sokka and Appa. Ty Lee, quickly to me. I commanded, and they immediately took cover behind me. In our group, I'm considered a strong bender, and in equal standing, they listened to me in battle. Appa landed in front of us with Sokka. He held a boomerang, ready to throw it at any moment. And as I had the opportunity to observe, he does it very professionally. Katara, he yelled. Katara hadn't yet recovered from the punch and was struggling to breathe, and her arm was in pain. Don't move, kid, or I'll break your girlfriend's arm, and then burn her right here. And she's not feeling too good as it is. So, you better listen to me and hand over the baby Tom-Tom nicely. Believe me, burning is very painful. Sokka froze, unsure of what to do, but it only lasted a moment. In the next instant, he took the baby in his arms and showed it to us. I'll give him to you, just let Katara go. Don't hurt her, he said, carefully descending from the flying bison. He placed the baby on the planks, and the little one, smiling and laughing joyfully, made his way to Mai. I waited until the baby reached us and then looked back at Sokka. He stood tense, but his hands were raised. Idiot, I muttered under my breath, looking at him and tossing Katara towards him. Then, creating a fireball in my hand, which I had tested on Aang, I threw it at Sokka and Katara, whom Sokka had caught. At that moment, I felt the same overpowering force I had experienced on the barge. That overwhelming power that even the bravest consider fleeing from. Avatar. The thought flashed through my mind along with a tremendous sense of danger, and I, turning around, jumped up and with airbending pushes, sent Ty Lee and Mai further away, to another floor of the construction scaffolding. They're tough and will survive both the fall and the hits, though it will hurt. Two things happened next. First, my fireball exploded and threw Sokka and Katara in different directions. If for Katara this might still be somewhat tolerable, though a severe concussion was assured, Sokka's survival was not guaranteed. He's not a bender and doesn't have our physical resilience. Then, the construction scaffolding I was on, more accurately lying on after throwing the girls away, literally exploded. No, my fire had nothing to do with it. On the contrary, there was no fire. A massive airstream literally demolished a third of the entire construction, scattering all the planks and scaffolding into splinters, and me along with them. I tuned into my sensations and realized that Azula was nowhere near, while the girls I had thrown were on another floor, and the air wave had carried them even further away. So, Aang, round 2. I yelled at him. He stopped staring at Katara and Sokka, who now lay motionless on the remaining intact island of planks, and turned his gaze to me, his face twisting in anger. Come on, attack me, I whispered to myself. Aang opened his mouth in a silent scream, and I felt the air masses around me start to move, turning into a terrible hurricane, and then he stretched his hands towards me, and I saw the condensed air masses, now visible even to the naked eye, rushing towards me along with all the planks and dust in their path. "Screw you!" I yelled and, clapping my hands, spread them apart. A parasitic movement, but I wasn't up for airbending control practice right now, especially since airbending is my weakest element, and I really needed the gestures at this moment. I couldn't stop or redirect this attack. I simply didn't have enough control over the element, not to mention the strength, but deflecting it just a bit, I could do that. So, I acted as a wedge, splitting the stream of this destructive horror into two parts that diverged slightly. Just a tiny bit, but even that was difficult. Definitely need to work on airbending if I survive this time. The deadly stream ceased, and at that moment, I released several explosive fireballs towards where I felt that overwhelming force was coming from, and then, with a powerful air push beneath me, jumped up, performing a front IP and sending the most powerful flame wave I could muster, followed by 4 dense fire streams attacking from different sides. However, the fire seemed to be absorbed into a small sphere. When the fire gathered between the hands, I saw that these weren't Aang's hands. More accurately, I felt through bloodbending that it was Aang, but I saw something entirely different. A tall old man with a thick, now gray from age, mane of long hair and an equally thick and long beard, wearing the Fire Nation crown on his head and ceremonial Fire Nation garments from ancient times. And his eyes glowed just the same. Avatar Roku. It was definitely him. After the first fight with the Avatar, I thoroughly researched all the information I could find on avatars. From facts to legends. And I could definitely distinguish the last avatars by their appearance. The fire collected by Roku was unleashed towards me and simply swept me away. I felt the construction scaffolding break against my back, then hit the statue of Ozai being built. Seems like I broke a couple of ribs. All the higher construction scaffolding began to collapse and fall on me, but I had other concerns. Water gathered from the air around me was immediately compressed and then transformed into steam. The explosion scattered all the debris around me, and I quickly freed myself, jumping to a more or less open space, and sent even more compressed steam in an icy shell towards the Avatar, followed by very sharp stone spikes, thanks to the stone statue right behind me. The steam explosion was blocked by an air wall, but it couldn't stop the stone projectiles, which shattered upon impact with what I assumed was Roku's earthbending. I gathered the steam back and added even more water from the surroundings. In my left hand, a very dense oxygen orb appeared, surrounded by a red flame shell that, however, didn't burn the oxygen until I allowed it, and in my right hand, a very dense but extremely hot steam orb in an icy shell. Jumping, I stretched my legs towards the Avatar, sending as powerful an oxygen wave as I could with one leg and immediately mixing it with fire from the right leg. The resulting volumetric explosion engulfed the Avatar and blocked the view, which I used to jump as high as possible with an air push, sending the most dense flame stream I could from my mouth at him and releasing charges not directly at him, but to the sides of him. Let's play with contrasts. 2 simultaneous explosions sounded, and I saw the Avatar simply blown away. He emerged from the smoke cloud and was thrown about 15 meters away. At that moment, I sensed danger again, and a shadow covered me. Looking up, I saw a large part of the Ozai statue being built, a huge stone slab hanging over me, beginning to fall towards me. Damn Boomy! Chapter 30. I regained consciousness instantly. One moment a statue was falling on me, the next I was breaking it as best as I could, then I felt a strong hit to the head, and suddenly, I was back to my senses. My back ached from broken ribs, but I wasn't losing blood, preventing it from owing out, and the blood that had already left me, I returned. The blood was still fresh, the cells alive, meaning I hadn't been unconscious for too long. I needed to recover. Water surrounded me, and I could feel the blood flow from the wound stopping and the wounds themselves healing. Pain arose twice in my back as the ribs snapped back into place and began to heal quickly. With the abundance of life force within me, I would have recovered much faster than normal anyway, but it would have looked very unusual in the eyes of others, so it was better to heal now, while no one was watching. Now, tuning into my body, I felt no injuries or traumas left. I left a few scratches untouched, so as not to appear completely unharmed. I was under a massive pile of huge rocks. All I had managed to do was to destroy the falling statue, protect myself from being crushed, and now I was under a massive heap of stones, needing to get out. However, I also felt Ty Lee above me. It seemed she was trying to clear the stones? Well, then I would have to delay using earthbending. Turning around, I stretched both hands upwards. I took a deep breath, saturating myself with a large amount of oxygen. After a few more deep breaths, I felt slightly dizzy, then my mind cleared, and my body seemed lighter. Focusing and exhaling sharply, I began releasing the most powerful flame from my hands. Lack of ventilation didn't bother me. I easily created oxygen in my lungs and used it to enhance my fire even more. I did use earthbending to slightly soften the stones, making them much easier to succumb to the fire and heat up. Very quickly, they began to turn red. First dark red, but gradually brightening. I felt Ty Lee quickly leap away from where she was. Apparently, the fire was already breaking through, or the heat was spreading. After minutes, I felt the stones begin to melt, liquefy, and under the stream of fire burst upwards, not downwards, directly towards me. It was incredibly hot around, but I drained the heat from the surrounding air and directed this heat back into the stream of fire. An old, retired firebender in the circus, not particularly strong but had learned to cool his tea by simply taking the heat and releasing it elsewhere, taught me this trick of redirecting heat. Gradually, the task was done, and the free space grew. The molten rock rose upwards because of the fire streams, which I hadn't stopped yet. And I didn't think I should, as after stopping, the molten rock would immediately fall back down, towards me. Earthbending helped me discreetly move especially large stones or soften them. But then, at some point, I saw the fire stream stop breaking and heating the stone, instead continuing to shoot upwards. That was it. I had literally burned my way out. Yes, a hotter flame would have made this much faster. Stopping the flame, I stood up. Around me was the glowing hot stone, which almost shone, and I was barely sweating from the heat. Reminded me of prison, it was at least as hot there, even a bit hotter. I extended my hand forward, palm up, and began to absorb the heat from the surroundings, especially from the walls, releasing it with the other hand in a fierce stream upwards. In half a minute, the stone cooled to just warm stone. Emerging outside, I saw Ty Lee looking at me. She looked shocked, then ran to me and hugged me with a squeal. "You're alive! You're alive! You're alive!" she nearly shouted in my ear. Hey! I might be alive, but with your efforts, we could rectify this pleasant oversight, I replied to this cheerful girl. Oh, sorry. Where are Mai and Azula? Where's Avatar and the others? I asked her. Mai went to look for Azula. The Avatar took Bumi, as well as his unconscious friends, and they ewe away on their bison. All together. I immediately started looking for you among the stones, then suddenly, in one place, fire started to burst from beneath the stones. I leaped back and watched. The stone first turned red, then yellow, later it flowed and exploded, and a column of flame burst out. And then you emerged. I'm so glad you're alive. And you saved us and Mai. Though it still hurts. If it hurts, it means you're still alive. Let's go and Mai and Azula. We headed in the direction Azula initially followed the Avatar. Along the way, we saw marks from her fire, so following her wasn't difficult. Soon we found her. And there were Mai and some Fire Nation soldiers nearby. Azula was lying under a massive stone slab. More precisely, her legs, from the knees down, were crushed under a heavy stone slab. Azula lay unconscious, and everyone stood around doing nothing. What are we waiting for? She's going to die from blood loss. Quickly, bring a stretcher and bandages. Hurry! I yelled at these paralyzed degenerates. I approached Azula and examined the injury site. Though I'm no medic, it was clear to me that Azula was now a definite invalid. The slab had simply attended her legs up to and including the knee joints. The legs were squeezed and torn off. Even reattachment wouldn't be possible here, and waterbending was unlikely to help. Tai Li carefully grab her shoulders, and on my command, pull her away from the slab. I'll cut away the skin and other tissues still connecting her to the crushed limbs, then cauterize the wounds. Got it? Act! The girls approached and carefully took the princess by the shoulders. I created a fire dagger from red flame in my hand and with one motion separated the still intact legs from the crushed ones. It made a clean transverse cut just above the knees. Mai and Tai Li immediately lifted Azula and carried her to the quickly delivered stretcher. I approached closer and created 2 fire discs, the at and wide side of which I applied to the cut, cauterizing the wound and stopping the bleeding. I looked at the princess's face. She was pale from the significant blood loss. Getting closer, I cut open the armor on her chest with a single motion of the fire dagger. I then spread it aside and, without touching the shirt or whatever it was, placed my ear to her heart. The heartbeat was there. Checked the pulse, it was there too. She was breathing. Since I'm not a medic and understand little about it, I did all I could for now. Now, carefully grab the stretcher and carefully, without shaking but swiftly, take Princess Azula to the governor's residence. And God help you if you screw this up, I'll burn you alive on a slow Move! I yelled at the Fire Nation soldiers standing nearby. They didn't even think about disobeying me, or maybe they did but didn't dare to. Carefully picking up the stretcher, they carried it to the governor's residence. Is Tom alright? I asked her, because at that moment, when I kicked them to another Ur, I forgot about the little one, and he was in his older sister's arms. Yes, he's in she replied indifferently, although the paleness on her face was noticeable. Perhaps the fate of her friend scared her greatly. I've already sent him with the soldiers to his parents. Good that he's in Go with Azula. When she wakes up, she'll likely be agitated. Calm her down. You too, Tai Li. Calm her down. Stay with her at all times. Clear? If so, then go. And remember, when she wakes up, she might be slightly, or perhaps not so slightly, irrational. Be careful with her. I didn't go with them. I'll let Azula marinate in her feeling of disability. Let her experience it, go through all the stages of accepting the inevitable. Then I'll offer her a way out. Not for free, of course. I'll have only one wish, to teach me lightning. As I learned, lightning is a prerogative of the royal family. However, if it's a willingly given gift, or payment for healing. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to synchronize my energy with the energy of electricity on my own. Lightning is too abrupt, too fast. I barely managed to notice this energy. And since I can't master this feature myself, I'll use others. Healing hasn't worked out yet, so now I'll focus on lightning, and then I'll get to it. So, I won't let Azula die. Chapter 31. A week had passed since our battle with Aang, and a week since Azula became disabled. No, she remained no less dangerous than before. After all, she was a master of firebending, capable of generating lightning, and a formidable fighter, only now she had no legs. She was disabled. Throughout the week, I didn't even approach Azula, keeping my distance, and then, after that time had passed, I went to see her. Tai Li told me how the princess raged, how she refused to believe in her current decency, how she then lashed out at everything and everyone, to the point where even Mai and Tai Li preferred to leave her be, lest the princess accidentally kill them in her fury. And then Azula fell into a deep depression. She just sat there for days, staring into nothingness, until I opened the door and approached her bed. Without saying anything, I turned my back to the princess and sat down on the edge of the bed. Garo? Why have you come here? To laugh at me? Or to see me weak as I am now? Azula asked in a subdued and very soft voice, glancing at me for just a moment. Looking at her face, I once again went over the story I had concocted and, carefully controlling my body and all its reactions, began to tell the prepared tale. Princess Azula. I started and then turned my back to her again. My lineage, according to the legends of our family, dates back about 10,000 years. Back when the nations of the elements were just forming. While everyone else worked with the elements, our family, for some reason, worked with spirits. I don't know why my ancestors made such a decision. However, it had consequences over many generations. When the Avatar sealed the spirit world, separating it from our world, we lost those who helped us, but instead of becoming like everyone else, we began to emulate the spirits. Very little of what was invented by my ancestors has survived to our days. Why are you telling me these fairy tales? You don't need to comfort me like a child. I've stopped throwing tantrums. Were you sent to check on me? She asked, looking at me again. Unlike our previous encounters, there was not a trace of anger or rage in her gaze. No aggression. She was broken. She couldn't handle what had happened and broke. Among what has been passed down to me was dark healing. It's a special fire technique, created in imitation of some very evil spirits. Under normal circumstances, I would never offer this. I would help come up with something to compensate for your weakness. Saying this, I watched the princess's reaction, but it didn't come. She had already resigned herself to the fact that she was now worthless, but it turned out to be beyond your capabilities. You couldn't deal with what happened. Therefore, I offer you to undergo dark healing. It will restore your legs and fully restore your health. I caught Azula's gaze. It was soaked with hope, like that of a drowning person next to whom a boat passes by, and who can save you. The princess looked at me with exactly that gaze. No matter what kind of princess she was still just a 14-year-old girl. And I had given her such hope. An insane one, hard to believe, but hope nonetheless. However, there are a few conditions for performing dark healing. It requires about 2 weak benders or 3 strong non-benders. They will be the sacrifices, whose life and health you will receive. This is necessary for dark healing. I will order 3 people to be brought to me right now. They will be the sacrifices. Azula said, breathing faster, joyfully. She believed. She believed because she saw no other options. That's not all. Normally, this technique implies self-healing, so there are no problems in that case. You don't even notice them, but when healing another, it becomes noticeable. What is given belongs to the one who uses the technique. Currently, I am the only one who can use this technique. This means that the legs returned to you will also belong to me. It won't matter. At least until my death. After that, what's returned will eventually disappear. In other words, if I die, you will lose your legs again. This was an outright lie, but I have rehearsed long and watched for reactions in my body, nullifying all that would reveal the lie in my words. And this lie was intended to make me necessary to Azula. It's hard to believe in such a thing, but after the return of her legs, the thought that if I was truthful in one aspect, then I might have been truthful in the other as well. And this thought would come to her mind every time she even thought about eliminating me. Moreover, she would do everything in her power to prevent others from killing me. However, all this was just a description of what is needed for dark healing and a story about the consequences. However, I would like to ask for something in return from you. Determination ickered in Azula's eyes, so she didn't hesitate for a second before answering. Anything. Just say it, and I'll give you whatever you wish. And if I can't myself, I'll ask my father, he'll give you what you wish. What do you want? She asked, moving closer to me on her hands, and her leg stumps must have been terribly painful. The wounds hadn't healed. And there were no waterbenders here for healing. Lightning. I want you to teach me lightning. Share this knowledge with me. Can you do that? I asked her. Lightning, she smiled, and nodded happily, thinking the price was laughably small and she was losing nothing. I will teach you lightning. Myself. Of course, herself, because as the stories go, it's very dangerous and if you mess up, you might fry yourself with a charge. And now she doesn't want my death, so she decided to control everything personally. I am very glad, Princess Azula. Then I will be waiting. I am ready to start at any moment. You know what I need. I left the room, and at the princess's voice, the soldiers guarding the entrance to her room peeked in. An hour later, I was in a room with Princess Azula in a wheelchair and 3 bound strong-looking men. Besides us, there were also a few Fire Nation soldiers. I am ready to begin, Princess, but are you sure the others should see this? I nodded towards the soldiers. Yes, you're right. Leave us and wait outside. Wait! You should know, immediately after the technique, you will be very hungry, so let them prepare a lot of food. Especially dairy products, meat, and nuts. The soldiers left, obeying Azula's words, and I approached the sacristies. Well then, I will begin. I extended my hands forward and, following the program rehearsed over the week, released threads of fire from my palms. It was beautiful and spectacular, though completely useless. But that was exactly what I needed. The sacristies began to moan as loudly as they could. Thankfully the gag didn't allow them to scream, while the fire threads enveloped their heads. However, the fire had to burn the gag, it would have interfered later. Covered by fire, I took control of the blood in the sacristies and forced it to seize life, holding it with blood clamps. This was the weakest part of the preparation. I had never taken blood and life from 3 people simultaneously, so the main thing was to try and not screw up. The extracted blood drops were immediately enveloped in fire but did not burn. Actually, selective burning is really difficult. The sacrifices visibly withered right before our eyes, at least it was noticeable by their arms, while their faces were engulfed in flames, and the withering process was not visible. The blood drops merged into one ball, also enveloped in flame, and this ball grew right in front of Azula's face, who was watching this process with wide-open eyes. The fire consumed the bodies of the sacrifices and began to incinerate them as soon as the last drop of blood left their bodies. I didn't want to leave such evidence. The blood ball, inside which the life of these people was trapped, enveloped in flame, rushed towards Azula's face. She closed her eyes, squinted, and passed out as the blood flow to her brain was briefly blocked. Now I could breathe a sigh of relief. I had made an impression, concealed bloodbending, and now there was no need to show off. Extinguishing the fire on the blood ball, I proceeded with the experiment. First, it was about integrating blood and life into the patient's body. Nothing complicated here. Then, it was about making Azula's body absorb, devour, and assimilate what was given to her. Well, let's begin. The blood ball divided into one large and wide one, and 2 much thinner blood strands. The first started entering the body through the mouth, the others through the eyes. Let's start. Chapter 32, How is Azula? I asked Ty Lee, who had come to join us for dinner at our table. The company gathered here was quite large, her mother, father, Tom, myself, and now Ty Lee as well. She's always eating a lot, and when she's not eating, she just smiles. Ty Lee responded with a smile, sitting down at the table with us and joining the meal. That's good. She needs to eat a lot right now to not deplete her body. After all, growing limbs is a taxing process for the body. It's amazing. I'd never heard that rebending could be used to heal people. Have you never thought of becoming a healer? These are unique skills. As far as I know, no one else is capable of this, the governor said to me. Mai looked at him, sighed deeply, and shook her head at her father's words. I'm afraid that's a bad idea. Unfortunately, this rebending technique is not called dark healing for nothing. For the life and health of one person, you have to pay with the lives of 3 others. It's not an equal exchange, very destructive for the soul of the user. I was making this up on the why and feeding these people nonsense. What a terrible technique. Mai's mother looked at me in shock. And how often have you used it? She asked me. 3 times, I said after a brief pause, the RST time when I was learning this technique and saving my own life. The second time, when I saved the life of a guy who once saved me but lost an arm. The third time was here. And who was honored this time? I asked with interest. For the first time, she showed me some emotion. His name is Frio. However, among our people, he became famous under a different nickname. And how is he known? Mai's mother asked. In some places, he became known as the elusive Joe. I smirked, seeing the governor choke. He should have been aware of my capture and the subsequent events, being a high-ranking official, but here he is more likely known to soldiers and benders as Chimamanda Monsuda. Now, the reaction was visible on all present, except perhaps Tom Tom. However, the rest froze. Soldiers standing by the doors also froze, barely moving. The governor's wife and mine went a bit pale, as did the governor himself. Understandably, rumors had it, I was last seen near Omashu. That was several months ago, but still. I had earned quite a reputation for my alter ego. Among the Fire Nation people, I was really feared. Soon they'll start making legends about me. Why did I reveal my real name? What's the point in hiding it? No use at all. I can change my appearance at any moment and maintain it for a long time. If I don't engage in battles, I could even exit from the RST attempt. Now it simply makes no sense to hide such information. Now I can become anyone. Well, almost anyone. I'm still quite limited, but still. And how, if it's not a secret, did you meet? And what is he like, this Chimamanda Monsuda? The governor asked, putting his cutlery down. Can't swallow your food? It was nothing special. I was attacked. I defended myself, and he appeared. Together, we managed to fend off the attackers. That's when I used the technique for the second time. As for him, a guy my age. In some ways, our appearances are similar, only his hair is lighter, his facial features are completely different, his eyes are green, unlike my blue. My height, his physique clearly shows that he, like me, did not neglect physical exercises. They say he's a genius in waterbending, I said. Yep, that's right. We traveled together for a while, and during that time, he managed to copy the dark healing technique based on my explanations, transferring it from fire to water, more precisely to bloodbending. Honestly, in his execution, this technique looked very creepy. But effective, can't deny that. He managed to replicate your technique? The governor asked in surprise. Oh, you didn't know? I thought everyone knew. I was genuinely surprised, as I really thought so. After all, it was precisely this technique, because of which I was called a master of bloodbending. And suddenly, it turns out nobody knows about it. After that, we ate in silence. Nobody wanted to continue the conversation. After dinner, Tai Li and I went outside for some group work, and then we stood in a sparring match against each other. I learned her close combat style, and she used me as a strong sparring partner on whom more than half of her strikes didn't work. Plus, I had my own unique fighting style, so she had something to learn as well. These training sessions started back in the circus when I got interested in her ability to block bending in close combat, and she, a bit later, asked me to teach her to fight as smoothly and beautifully. Whatever you say, my style is based on wushu, which was first adapted to control water in combat, then earth was added, and finally, fire. It turned out to be a wild mix, but seemingly effective. At least, nobody has told me otherwise yet. Our training didn't last long. I called Tai Li, and they went off on their business, and I climbed onto the roof of the house and, sitting there, started meditating while the wind blew around. It seemed like this wind was completely natural and there was nothing unusual about it, but that's good, nobody will accuse me of practicing airbending. This is exactly how I train in this element. For more complex exercises, the time is not right yet, and I have too little control for that. At the same time as creating winds, I listened to the vibrations of the stone of the house I was sitting on. I wasn't particularly successful in distinguishing anything, but I had already begun to understand when someone was walking nearby in the house. It's somewhat similar to the surface of the water into which raindrops fall. This noise won't let you understand anything from the vibrations, but if someone suddenly throws a larger stone into the water nearby, the waves from it will be strong enough to make themselves known even through the background noise. That's how I was already starting to distinguish vibrations from the steps of armored Fire Nation soldiers about 10 meters from me, but I wouldn't feel tom-tom even 2 meters away from me. Meditation, meanwhile, allows me to gradually, how to put it, lower the sensitivity to too many vibrations that create background noise, leaving only the vibrations I need in my perception area, while increasing the area of perception of these vibrations. The thing is, I currently perceive the vibrations of the earth as constant white noise, in which I can only distinguish particularly strong vibrations from people and objects. However, by gradually reducing sensitivity, some of these new vibrations become less perceptible to me, and I start feeling the necessary vibrations better. And I feel them from a greater distance. In other words, I'm improving my seismic sense by tearing out the unnecessary from my perception. By the way, indeed, the brain best interprets the information received through vibrations as three-dimensional images. A kind of 3D model of everything that's happening related to the Earth. Very unusual information. And perhaps I'm even glad that I didn't immediately get a perfectly tuned seismic sense. I'm afraid it would have been too much for the brain. But this way, I gradually, albeit slowly, altered out the unnecessary and felt the vibrations better, getting used to them. I try to walk more often with my eyes closed. If you use both seismic sense and eyes, it turns out to be too high a single load on the brain. I really fainted several times while I was in Omashu, suffering from sensory shock and losing consciousness. The head hurts a lot after waking up, and it's good that I can stimulate my body's recovery. Without it, it would be scary to develop seismic sense. Maybe stop using eyes at all for some time. Tie them up and fully switch to seismic sense, but definitely not now, later, when I get better at sensing the environment through the earth. 4 hours later, Ty Lee ran up to me and, climbing onto the roof to me, pulled me away from meditation. "Garo! Hurry up!" A messenger hawk arrived and brought a letter. "It's a message from the Fire Lord," she said to me energetically, trying to pull me along with her. I'm coming, just calm down." We quickly descended from the roof and headed to Mai. She was in the room with Azula. The princess was lying on the bed, and her legs were under the blanket. Judging by Azula's face, she was now experiencing all the delights of extremely rapid bone and tissue growth in her legs, and that's quite a pleasure, I tell you. "Ty Lee, Garo, father sent me a letter. He has learned about everything that happened to me and wants me to return home to the palace immediately," Azula told us. "So we won't be able to meet Zuko? What a pity," Ty Lee said. "Father wrote that he wants you to accompany me and ensure my safety while I'm unable to stand up for myself. You're coming with me to the Fire Nation capital. We're returning to the palace. I hope you'll enjoy your visit, Garo." Azula smiled. I looked at her for a few seconds, thinking, should I go there? To go there, where perhaps the strongest firebender resides? What do I lose from this? They don't seem to be planning to kill me. And I still haven't gotten my lightning. Undoubtedly. Chapter 33, you must not allow any emotions to surface. You need to have an absolutely cold mind. Only in this case will you be able to direct the lightning you create. Azula, sitting in a wheelchair held by one of the soldiers, told me. We were currently on a ship heading to the Fire Nation capital, directly to Azula's father. And it was at this moment that Azula decided to start teaching me about lightning. After listening to Azula, I focused and first, through controlling my body, suppressed most of the hormones in me. After all, I am a teenager with plenty of them in my blood, especially at the thought that I could finally start getting what I wanted, which considerably increased their amount. However, suppressing them was not difficult. After that, it was no trouble at all to concentrate and partially enter meditation, completely cutting off such a multifaceted irritant as emotions from my mind. When I opened my eyes again, I was fully focused on the princess sitting in front of me and watching me. My mind was clear of any emotions. Completely. It was a strange sensation, but I felt no discomfort from it. Did it really work? Azula looked at me incredulously and propped herself up in the chair with her hands. I have good control over myself and often meditate, so taking control of my emotions and simply detaching from them was not difficult for me. I answered her question. I see. It took me 3 months of training to be able to detach from emotions and feelings for the first time. I'm a bit envious, Azula said, examining me. Well, since you've managed it, let's move on to the next stage. Now you need to take control of your chi, the energy owing within you, and separate it into positive and negative sides. When you can do that, it will be enough to simply release them, and at the moment of their convergence, lightning will be born. You cannot hold and control it, it will kill you. So you should release it immediately, as quickly as possible. The longer you hold it, the more the lightning charge accumulates, making it stronger, but also increasing the risk of your own death from the charge. So if you can create lightning, release it right away, do not delay a moment. Later, you will understand how to properly accumulate the power of lightning, and then you will be able to accumulate a charge. Azula meticulously described everything she felt when creating lightning and shared all she knew about how to create it, adding her own comments to this knowledge. 15 minutes into the lecture, as I continued to stand indifferently on the ship's deck with a stony face, Azula finished and told me to proceed while she moved further away to the side. Mastering lightning is dangerous, primarily for the learner, but also for those around. I recalled everything Azula had said and analyzed her words, translating them into my own terminology and concepts. So, lightning is the product of an explosive reaction of mana, or, as Azula puts it, chi. Interestingly, this is the first time I've encountered bending referred to as a separate energy rather than some element, which is saturated, one part with negative emotions, the other with positive emotions. The explosive reaction occurs due to the collision of mana, which is colored by opposite emotions. Perhaps that's why an emotionless state is necessary, to not disrupt the balance or add some emotion to the lightning that could harm. After the explosive reaction of mana, a large amount of energy is released, manifesting as electrical energy. Holding it, the mana reaction continues for some unknown reason, accumulating energy. However, if control is not maintained, the energy disperses through the body and, upon reaching vital organs, especially the heart, kills the bender. Personally, I think hitting the brain would be just as deadly. Hence, the lightning must be released immediately, as in most cases benders lack control over the energy. Over time, control is acquired, allowing for a larger lightning charge to be accumulated, making the attack more destructive. I seem to understand this part. Now the questions at hand. How to saturate mana, or part of the mana, with negative and positive emotions. How to separate the energy into negative and positive sides. How to divide them into yin and yang. I thank you for your explanations, Princess Azula, they were very helpful to me and gave me food for thought. However, I realize that I probably won't be able to do this anytime soon. I cannot imagine how to divide chi into yin and yang. However, I will try and hope to master the creation of lightning. I hope you're not offended that I took your time. No, not at all, I didn't mind spending it on you, and I should be thanking you, so don't worry about anything. As for the lightning, I didn't manage everything at once either. You managed to get through the first stage almost immediately, so I think the second stage won't be an obstacle for you. Bowing to the princess, I went to my cabin, pondering Azula's changed behavior. And she really had changed. Or rather, she had been supplemented, as she communicated and related to everyone else almost exactly the same, a little better towards her friends, Ty Lee and Mai, but most of all, her supplemented or partial change was noticeable towards me. She started treating me better. Much better. I would even say that she began to respect me. She tries to fulfill my requests as quickly as possible and at the first opportunity, and she listens to my words more than to anyone else's. And I have already managed to verify that this is indeed the case. I suspect that my help to her is to blame for this. The help I provided when she was weak. Yes, Her rebending remained with her, but now I could defeat her without much effort. The only trump card she had left was lightning, nothing more. And, it seems, what I did, how I helped, the legend I invented, practically, perhaps even entirely, everything I did, in the end, when she saw the beginning of the result, something changed in her psyche, or supplemented it. I'm not an expert and can't say exactly. But the fact remains, I managed to attach Azula to myself. I don't know how reliably and strongly, but I did. And I need to think about the opportunities this opens up for me. If the attachment is strong and high quality, then eventually, sooner or later, she will come to power in the Fire Nation, as her elder brother is exiled, her uncle is in the same place as her elder brother, leaving her the only heir to the throne, and her mother has long disappeared, with no new wife for Ozai in sight. And, coming to power, if she remains attached to me, she will give me immense opportunities. Perhaps it's worth considering developing her attachment to me into a stronger one, like a romantic relationship? Not anytime soon, of course, as she is recovering and will need about 2.5 weeks for full recovery. Her process is much slower because, unlike me, she cannot control her body as deeply and assimilate food nearly 100%. Therefore, she needs to eat much more, and the process is much slower. I fully restored my hand in 2 weeks. For her, by my estimates, it will take about 1.5 weeks. Entering my cabin, I sat on the bed and began to meditate. Now my goal is not the usual training, but learning to divide mana into negative and positive sides. Maybe I simply haven't noticed something in my mana? Maybe it doesn't need to be saturated? However, thoughts kept intruding about how many opportunities in bending study I could gain if I got much closer to Azula. And besides, when was the last time I was with a girl? I remember it was back when I was leading a criminal organization known as the Elusive Joe. Then there were girls who admired me, and they often ended up in my bed. Although I was much younger, I was very well developed physically, and the girls were not much older than me, sometimes even the same age. But these thoughts were pushed out of my mind for the time being, and I focused on my energy. I need to understand what I currently do not. Chapter 34. After several days of traveling at maximum speed and surviving a storm in the ocean, we were told that we had reached the gates of Azula. A monumental structure that commands respect with its size and the fact that it's not just a decoration but also one of the ways to protect against enemy invasion. In case of an alarm, chains located underwater rise thanks to special mechanisms and ignite with fire. Only the most powerful of the Fire Nation's warships, whose engines would allow them to not get entangled in the chains, could overcome such a defense. The chains are very thick and made of some extremely heat-resistant and durable metal, so it's really one of the main lines of defense for the Fire Nation, which will buy a considerable amount of time to fully prepare for defense and meet the enemy. I would have passed by this site if not for Azula, who asked Ty Lee to call me. As she said, she wanted me to see this monument to one of her ancestors. Another hour and a half of the ship's gradually slowing progress, and we docked at the port. The port is a separate part of the capital, which is over there. Azula pointed to a volcano connected by a wide road. However, over a long time, the port has turned into a separate small city without a name, though technically it's still part of the capital. Very interesting. So, the capital is located inside the crater of a volcano? I asked. Yes. The volcano has been dormant for thousands of years and shows no signs of activity. So, it's safe to live there. Moreover, the weather there is wonderful, and there are almost no winds. The volcano protects from winds and storms. That's also why not many people live in the port. They move to the capital. Not everyone, only the wealthiest among them. The territory for the capital is limited by the crater of the volcano, and so the cost of housing in the capital is constantly rising. The density of buildings increases, the population grows, and only the richest can afford a large area in the capital. The imperial family is the exception. We don't have that many houses, we simply don't need them. A palace in the capital, a few houses in different cities, and one villa on the Coal Island. Yes, and a few houses in the colonies. Not too wealthy, Princess Azula, I responded, walking beside her as one of the soldiers pushed her wheelchair. I thought the imperial family would have more property. After all, the imperial family. One would expect more. Perhaps. But we simply don't need more. We are not afraid of being overthrown. It's possible, but it wouldn't happen as it might in, say, the Earth Kingdom. Here, any firebender could potentially become the Fire Lord. All it takes is to defeat the current Fire Lord in an Agni Kai. However, few dare to attempt it. The last such challenger was killed in a duel with my father 7 years ago. My father is one of the strongest, if not the strongest, firebenders. And in the last 7 years, no one has dared to challenge him. So, there's no fear of being overthrown. Our lineage is the strongest among all current firebenders. Lightning, by the way, is a distinctive trait of our lineage. If someone else possesses this element, they likely, like you, receive this knowledge as a gift. There are very few such individuals. You are the third. The others are in our lineage. That is, me, my father, and Uncle Iroh. Isn't there a fear that someone very strong but foolish might come, win, and take power? That would be a disaster for the Fire Nation. In theory, yes, but not in practice. If we didn't have bending and fought with weapons, perhaps it would be so. However, we are benders. A regular bender can be foolish, but to be a strong bender, strong enough to kill my father in an Agni Kai, one needs to be strong in body, spirit, and mind. Without one of these, such immense power is unattainable. So, it's natural selection. And our lineage is at the top of this pyramid. Incredible. On one hand, it seems very unreliable, but if everything is really as you say, then with each change of power, the next ruler must be better than the last in every way. As all this affects his strength. His body, his spirit, his mind. Yes, you've understood everything correctly, Garo. Mai and Ty Lee followed us, also talking about something. 40 minutes later, we arrived at the capital. The ascent was long, but hardly anyone felt tired from such a climb. When we reached the highest point of the volcano, a magnificent view of the capital opened up. The densely built streets, looking like thin threads of roads that wove through the city like a web. At the center stood the enormous palace of the Fire Lord. And the view, I said, stopping and looking over the city, which really looked epic, is impressive. No doubt about it. Sure, in your little village, you've never seen anything like it. Azula said with a satisfied smile, looking at me. Yes, I've never seen anything like this before. I'm very glad you brought me here, Princess Azula. Azula. I'm tired of you calling me princess. I know that myself and don't need reminding. Let's go, we shouldn't make father wait, he doesn't like that. Mai and Ty Lee exchanged looks and, chuckling about something, Mai led the way. After a while, Ty Lee followed. Azula in her wheelchair, pushed by one of the soldiers, came right after them. I walked beside Azula. Now we descended into the crater, and I, curious, turned my head in all directions, trying to memorize the position of each house and street, correlating visual information with the impulses of information I received from seismic sense, which I activated for a couple of seconds, followed by a 20-second break. Thus, I correlated the not-so-clear information received from earthbending with visual information. Passers-by looked back at me, turning my head like I was some kind of oddity. Ty Lee smiled at this, and Azula paid no attention, lost in her thoughts. The only one who seemed completely indifferent, as if everything was beside her, was Mai. She walked with a stoic expression, continuing just the same. Finally, we reached the Imperial Palace. Fire Nation soldiers in full red armor with closed visors lined up in 2 rows opposite each other and placed the ST of their right hand to their chest, freezing in this pose. You're dismissed, Azula told the soldier pushing her wheelchair. But princess, you're... The soldier began. Did I not make myself clear? Azula said coldly. Now, I almost teared up from nostalgia. This was the Azula I was accustomed to seeing, to some extent, and knowing, and here I was getting used to how she treated me. So, her attachment is precisely an addition that changed her attitude towards me specifically, not a complete change in her character. The soldier released the wheelchair and stepped back, knowing it was pointless to even argue with Princess Azula, then joined one of the ranks. "Gar, will you push me?" Azula turned to me and looked me straight in the eyes. "As you say, Azula, as you say. I can't refuse such a small favor, for the first time." Smiling, Azula turned forward, and I started pushing her wheelchair. On the way to the Fire Lord's palace, where, as Mai told us, the ministers forming the council were currently located, I noticed constant glances at me. While I could understand those from Ty Lee, I couldn't fathom why the soldiers, or rather, the guards, were looking at me. Thoughts ranged from envy to recognizing me as Frio, but all had equally plausible likelihoods. So, I had no idea. The palace was dimly lit, with fire illuminating the entire space, and was full of people, from aristocrats to the servants of this huge building. However, when we arrived at the entrance to the throne room, we found no one there except two soldiers who immediately opened the massive doors. Inside, as we entered, I saw a triple row of thick columns with golden bases, each larger than a person. At the center, at the end, was a pedestal behind which was a wide wall of fire, with the silhouette of a person visible behind it. We moved forward and, stopping at the last column, kneeled. Or rather, I did, following the example of Mai and Ty Lee, while Azula remained seated in her wheelchair, only bowing her head. "Forgive me, Father, for not being able to kneel as is proper, but I am not in a condition to do so," Azula said. "I've heard what happened to you," came the voice from behind the wall of fire. "It's very sad." "So, you didn't end Zuko and my brother?" "I found them, Father, and almost captured them, but the folly and stupidity of the ship's captain, who with one word destroyed all I had worked for, allowed them to escape." "And how did you end up encountering the Avatar?" Ozai asked Azula. "I was assembling a personal squad with whom I could swiftly pursue the traitors without drawing too much attention, but I accidentally stumbled upon the Avatar. In the GHT, I managed to wound him, but he entered the Avatar state, after which I lost my legs. What happened after that, I only know from others' words." "And you are Garo?" The Fire Lord turned to me. "Yes, my lord." "Is it true that you were able to restore my daughter's legs?" he asked me. "Yes, my lord. But it's a lengthy process and will only be complete in about 2.5 to 3 weeks. Unfortunately, if the technique is applied to someone else, its effectiveness significantly decreases. I don't know what this technique is, I don't know who you are, where you're from, but—" At these words, the man stood up and walked towards us. He passed through the wall of fire and took a few more steps towards us until he stopped in front of me. He was a well-preserved, determined, still young-looking man with black hair falling down his back and a long, pointed beard. "I personally, as a father, am grateful to you for what you did for my daughter. And as the Fire Lord, I am even more grateful to you for giving our lineage a chance to continue ruling the Fire Nation and not be swept away just because of an unfortunate incident that happened to my daughter. Thank you." With these words, the standing Ozai placed his left hand into a ST, the back of which was facing outward, and placed the base of his right palm on the ST, then slightly bowed to me. "You will always be a welcome guest in my home. And while Azula is not going anywhere and is recovering from her injuries, I would like you to live in the palace as a new friend of our lineage." I lifted my head and looked into the eyes of Fire Lord Ozai, the strongest or one of the strongest firebenders. Now he was smiling and slightly bowing to me in gratitude for helping his daughter. Imagine that, maybe my ideas are even more real than I thought. "I am honored to accept your invitation to your home, my lord." Chapter 35. The daily routine of my training sessions remained unchanged in terms of schedule, but the variety narrowed down to gradually improving my seismic sense, which delighted me more and more with the clarity of perception of everything around me. Training now incorporated the use of seismic sense along with regular vision. After about a couple of hours of such training, I would start to experience migraines, and only then would I stop. However, what undoubtedly pleased me was that the amount of time I could sustain the training was increasing. It was only for a couple of minutes a day, but it was still progress. On the other hand, closing my eyes or gathering information impulsively made everything much better. My second training focus was attempting to create lightning. And, honestly, these attempts taught me much more about mana than all my musings. First and foremost, I learned that mana itself has no emotions. None. Neither positive nor negative. Mana, roughly speaking, is colorless, which led me to the final conclusion that it needs to be saturated with one's emotions. And here's where I realized something else: my method of suppressing emotions doesn't work for this. I essentially obliterate emotions within myself temporarily, suppressing hormones and detaching from them. But if there are no emotions, there's nothing to saturate the mana with. Therefore, I now had to meditate to learn how to suppress emotions with willpower instead of reason, directing all feelings into the mana. This isn't to say it's difficult, just unclear whether you've made progress or if you're merely fooling yourself, and whether stronger emotions could easily breach this barrier of will. These were my daily training routines, interspersed and greatly enriched by interactions with Ty Lee, sometimes with Mai, and especially frequent conversations with Azula. No, she never distracted me from training. Even wanting to talk with me, seeing me busy with training or meditations, she would turn around and leave, waiting until I was free. I examined the princess's growing legs. There wasn't much left, everything was going according to my predictions, and soon their growth should niche. After that, even though regrowing limbs orient themselves to the rest of the body or something else, they lag behind in physical conditions compared to the rest of the body, and it would take some time to return strength and endurance to the legs. Because of these examinations, I spent a lot more time with the princess. We often talked about various topics. Initially, it was hard, we couldn't find common ground, but over time, she started to adjust to me, and I to her. Simply deciding and accepting that it's worth trying for all the possibilities I could gain from Azula if we got close enough, dictated certain conditions, as I needed to maintain the good relationship with me and transform it into something closer. Well, for a potential success, it was worth a significant effort. And even to start developing a relationship with the princess. I felt like the hero of a fantasy novel where the main character gets princesses and a harem. By the end of the second week, when the legs had almost stopped growing and the active calibration of the nervous system in the new limbs was underway, I came up with a new use for bending. Who said it could only be used for killing? Sure, that's the simplest use, but right now, I'm in a place where I simply don't need that. But I still wanted to develop my bending further, and besides fire, there wasn't much room for that here. So, I found a much more peaceful, as well as in some ways, subtle and complex way of using blood and rebending. A kind of relaxing massage that greatly reduces the unpleasant sensations from calibrating nerve endings in the legs. The idea first came to me when I saw Azula's face slightly contort with pain during one of my visits. We were in the garden, and I sat on the edge of a fountain, while she was a bit away in her wheelchair. She often wanted us to come here, saying she spent a lot of time here with her brother and friends in her childhood, where she had fun and grew up. "Where did you grow up?" she asked me. "On the move, Azula," I replied to her question and looked into the fountain water, where sh of different colors and sizes swam. "I've been moving since childhood." "What about your parents?" She turned her head towards me, taking her gaze off the fountain water. "They died in the war." "And how did you?" She began to ask, but I cut her off, answering the question immediately without letting her niche. I've told this story in Omashu to everyone, but it was the RST time I used that technique on myself. Before that, I only knew the theory. But you started mastering fire only in the circus, right? Or am I mistaken? She asked herself in confusion. No, Azula, you're correct. Fire is an element I only began mastering in the circus, but specific techniques, they can be compared to martial arts. Controlling the fire element is a fighting style, and that technique, more of a separate move from that style. It might be complex, beautiful, effective, or something else, but it's a separate move, much easier to learn than the entire guiding style. So, you mastered a very complex fire technique, a healing one, without mastering the fire element, she asked me. As I've said, my lineage was peculiar. They didn't master the element. My ancestors created specific techniques based on the fire element, imitating spirits. Learning techniques and the element are completely different things. It's hard to explain. Incredible. I never suspected something like this. It goes against everything I knew. Azula told me. You don't have to believe me. I understand how it must sound crazy from your perspective. No, what are you talking about? I believe you, it's just incredible. Everything I knew turns out to be nothing compared to what I don't know. Azula exclaimed. She continued talking, and I watched her. She spoke energetically, becoming more and more animated with each word. And to think, this was the same princess I met in the circus, who nearly killed me with lightning and who fiercely battled me in web-ending spars. After that incident, after I used the moment to pull her from the abyss of despair she fell into because of her disability, she became very attached to me, although possibly, the factor that I lied to her about the dependency of her leg's integrity on my life played a role. But the final outcome remains unchanged. She became attached to me, and her attitude towards me changed significantly. With me, she became more open, perhaps. My thoughts were interrupted by her grimace of pain, tightly clenched jaws, and squinted eyes. Azula, are you okay? I asked, then remembered and respected my own limb growth experience. Do your legs hurt? Don't worry, it's normal for such rapid limb growth. Right now, your nervous system is checking the functionality of nerve tissue in your legs, so you feel pain. I get it, Azula managed to say through clenched teeth from the pain. That moment sparked the idea of using bending not just for killing purposes but for more peaceful ones, which, if effective, would help me even more. Wheeling Azula back to her room, the intense pain passed in a few minutes. These pains should occur periodically, and they're very unpleasant, I know from experience. Where are we going? Azula asked me when she was distracted from the pain, but then she looked around and oriented herself. The pain has passed, Garo, you don't need to take me to the room. I'm taking you for another reason. I want to try to help. If it works, your legs won't hurt as much anymore. If not, I definitely won't make it worse. We arrived at the princess's room door. Her room was very large, also all in red tones, with a screen made of several thin panels on one side, a table with a mirror and a bunch of hair care and appearance tools on the other. I'm not knowledgeable in this area, so I couldn't name even a tenth of what was there, except for immediately recognizing a comb. After wheeling Azula to the bed and transferring her onto it. Okay, I'll step out now, and you call a servant and change into something that exposes your legs. When you're done, call me, I'll be nearby, so the servant will see me immediately outside the room. Let's go, I'm waiting. Without letting the princess say anything, I stepped out of the room and stood close to the doors, just a couple of meters away. Soon, several maids arrived and disappeared inside Azula's room, while I ran my hand over my forearm, almost touching the skin. From the side, it wasn't noticeable, but from my palm emanated a strong, yet gentle warmth, and I was adjusting to find the most pleasant temperature, meanwhile conducting some manipulations with blood, controlling not all of it at once, but only a part. This should work with Azula too. Obviously, the temperature and blood manipulation would need to be adjusted for each person, but I found a general temperature range, which would speed up the process. Soon, I felt a response from my body, and the skin under my palm began to get goosebumps, feeling indescribably. Literally, all nerve endings under the area of effect from the warmth and blood went into an excited state, sending such a signal of irritation to the brain that I could call this technique a localized tactile euphoria, which would be the most sitting name. 15 minutes later, 2 maids left and went somewhere down the corridor past me. The third approached me. Mr. Garo, Princess Azula is waiting for you. After bowing, the maid immediately followed the others, but I stopped her. Wait. Bring some body oils. The princess will need them. Go on, but don't dally. Entering Azula's room, I saw her lying on the bed in something resembling a bikini. She looked great, I must admit, only the slightly disproportionate legs still in growth and their physical weakness compared to the rest of the body somewhat spoiled the picture. What are you planning to do? Why did I need to dress like this? She asked me. Actually, I only asked for your legs to be exposed. I didn't say anything about the rest, but okay. As you remember, I mentioned that the dark healing technique is just one of several that I inherited. I'd never used the second one, only know the theoretical part of the technique. Roughly speaking, it's a massage technique using rebending. I'll start preparing now, and then your maid should bring the body oils I requested. Now, lie still and don't move. Okay. I trust you. Without saying another word, I placed my hands an inch away from the surface of her skin and began emitting heat, aiding myself with bloodbending. For a few minutes, nothing happened, but then I heard a soft gasp from Azula, and her skin under my palm developed spreading goosebumps. Catching the right, let's say, setting, I began to spread the influence of my bending across her entire body. Inch by inch, from her toes to her neck, her body was covered in goosebumps, and Azula's breathing deepened. Azula's maid soon entered, leading a pitcher with a lid, saying it contained the oils I had requested. After applying the oils to my hands, I carefully began to massage, starting with the legs and ending with the shoulders. I'm not a professional masseuse and didn't even dabble in it. I got a bit of practice from my girlfriend in a past life, and that's about it, but now it was enough. Especially considering that her nerve endings were particularly sensitive because of me. The touches to her body initially elicited not strong screams, but definitely not from pain. Gradually, I massaged the leg muscles, and then, at Azula's request, moved to her back and from there to her shoulders. 40 minutes later, I left Azula's room, wiping my hands on a towel, and with a satisfied smile, headed to my room. The idea was not just a success, but a complete victory. And now the only concern was that Azula might become addicted to my massage. Well, it wouldn't hurt to practice this more often. I personally enjoyed the process too. Chapter 36. The four of us were in the throne room, kneeling before Fire Lord Ozai. Besides us and the Fire Lord, there was no one else in the room. Just me, Azula, Ty Lee, Mai, and Ozai. We all felt the warmth emanating from the wall of fire and saw the shadow of the firebender standing before us. I'm glad that your health has been restored, Azula, and that you can walk again. Garo, is everything all right? Ozai asked, turning his head toward me, standing to the left of Azula. Yes, my lord, health is fully restored, the legs have finished growing and are completely healthy, now only the physical strength of the legs needs to be regained, but that requires exercises and constant training. Wonderful! I am very glad that Azula has someone like you. As for training, she will regain their strength on the way. On the way, father? Azula lifted her head and looked at her father. Yes. You are heading to the walls of Ba Sing Se, where preparations are underway to breach the wall. You'll learn the details later. I want you, Azula, to be there and take command of the city until my resident arrives. Is that clear? Ozai asked Azula. Yes, father, I will not let you down. Azula lowered her head again, expressing a bow. And you? I want you to accompany my daughter and take an active part and assist in overcoming the walls and capturing the main city fortress of the Earth Kingdom, Ozai said, looking at us. And you, Garo? I ask you to take care of my daughter's health. I also bowed my head in respect and said nothing. 4 hours later, we were already on a ship ready to depart. I stood at the edge of the ship, holding onto the railing. Here, in the bay, not a volcano, so a pleasant breeze was blowing around me, and I watched the people running back and forth in the city port, which, moreover, serves as the main industrial and production center from which tanks, weapons, and so forth are dispatched. Did you like it at my home? Azula asked, approaching and stopping next to me, looking in the same direction as I was. Yes. I must admit, I definitely liked it here very much. And by the way, Azula, I have news for you. What is it? Azula turned to me with interest. Raising my left hand with fingers spread, I focused. Look! I said after 20 seconds of concentration, small electric discharges began to go from one finger to another with very low power. I finally managed to generate lightning. Azula looked at my hand, her face screaming astonishment, and then she turned her gaze to me, smiling. But why? Not knowing which word to choose better, she paused in her speech. Why so little? Not a full-edged lightning, but only small electric discharges? Simply, I used very little of my chi, literally a drop, and did all that you said. And it's not enough for more. The discharges in my hand stopped running back and forth, and I lowered it. There, the power I used up is gone. I think I can create a powerful lightning. There's no difference, as far as I understand, only the energy expended varies. So now I'll be expecting further training from you. Azula and I talked for another 15 minutes when the ship began to sail. Once we left the bay, the ship picked up much greater speed, and then the wind became inconvenient, whistling over our words, and we headed to our cabins. The journey was going to take us about 2 weeks at standard speed, and then an extra day or so to get to Ba Sing Se. However, the duration would increase by at least 6 hours, as the ship needed to refuel with coal, replenish food and water supplies, in short, all standard procedures. And this didn't even account for the possibility of encountering a storm or another problem. This could further delay our arrival. Naturally, the 4 of us were terribly bored, and we all entertained ourselves as best we could. I spent most of my free time training with the lightning element. I managed to create lightning very recently, just 10 hours before departing from the port. And you know what? It's like riding a bicycle. If you manage to do it once, it gets much easier afterward. With lightning, it doesn't work exactly the same way, but if you manage to create it once, you can easily do it again and again. And absolutely everything else was a matter of energy control. Interestingly, lightning was controlled precisely through energy. Not like fire or any other element, but rather as one of the forms of pure mana that acquires all the properties of lightning but remains mana. If compared to fire, their mana is completely transformed into fire, and that's it. In creating lightning from an explosive reaction, we get a new form of mana. It's mana, not lightning, but mana that has partly become fire and partly remained mana. As if the elemental particles of mana, if such a thing exists, haven't yet decided whether to be a fire element or remain as mana. And this uncertainty is taken for lightning. But it's not lightning. It's mana that has all the properties of lightning but is not lightning itself. However, this has its advantages. Although for other benders, it's rather a minus. Such a form of bending, although it appears as an element, is not, and therefore standard, conventional techniques of mastering the element don't apply here. Therefore, controlling lightning is extremely difficult. For others. However, because it's still mana and not a new element, controlling this lightning was much easier for me. Essentially, I was controlling the same mana, just in a kind of quantum uncertainty. Gosh, it sounds overly complex, but I express it as I understand it. Yes, I also control my mana not exactly excellently, far from perfectly, but precisely mana control is important in mastering new elements, because without it, you can't synchronize your energy with the element. So in a way, I do have control over my energy, and therefore, lightning was relatively easy for me to control. But I will definitely try to resolve this bending uncertainty to a definite outcome and create real lightning someday. For now, the full edge and, in my opinion, no less effective substitute is enough for mastery. For more than 2 weeks, I spent most of the day meditating. There was no land nearby, so I tried to perceive vibrations through the metal of the ship. And I must say it wasn't much different. Yes, initially, it was challenging because I was perceiving vibrations and amplifying them for myself using earthbending, you could say. I was retransmitting them, but with metal, it was both simpler and more complicated at the same time. It was harder because the retransmission using earthbending in the case of metal showed very low efficiency. However, it was simpler because metal, in general, spreads vibrations faster, better, and further. Still, most of my training was devoted to developing lightning. Azula also practiced this with me. But unlike me, she was always moving, performing pirouettes. It seemed to me that she was showing off in front of me. I, on the other hand, sat and meditated or, when using lightning, concentrated. I can't understand how. Why can you create lightning without moving at all? She asked when another lightning bolt, accumulated by me for a few seconds, was launched at the jagged shore of one of the islands a couple of 100 meters from the ship, and a bunch of rocks in response collapsed and fell into the water, creating a lot of splashes. Because, how to tell you, we have completely different approaches to bending. Everyone uses a method similar to yours, linking certain movements to specific elemental actions and subsequently using all of it. Or they weave elemental effects into entire katas. They produce a psychological attachment to the effect. This is good at least because it allows achieving results much faster than with my method. However, this has been happening over centuries, millennia. It has almost woven into the essence of all benders. And you're different? Or is it again because of your lineage? Azula asked, coming closer. Don't think that my lineage is so brilliant and great. All we did was imitate the spirits. And their bending is in no way related to martial arts. I know how to fight in hand-to-hand combat, you know this yourself. But I don't need to move to control the fire. Then why do you say your method is slow? It's been less than a year since you started learning rebending in the circus with Ty Lee, and now you already surpass me, a master of re. Have you seen how I meditated? I asked Azula, relaxing after using lightning. Using a full-edged version of this technique requires a lot of energy. For example, Azula can strike with maximum power lightning bolts about 30 times, each of which could destroy the ship we're sailing on. Another thing is that accumulating the necessary charge would take her about half a minute, but the tests showed exactly such a result. The speed of accumulation depends on the creator of the lightning's throughput capacity, thanks to which he releases the charge outside and immediately retains it. For example, my throughput capacity is several times higher than Azula's, but here, as I suspect, everything is involved: training and meditation from childhood, internal energy management, development of several elements, constant training, good physical development, very costly development of bloodbending, long, in my opinion, very. Stay in the spirit world and consume these spirits in large quantities and variety, and now also constant maximum loads using lightning. All this combined gives me the ability to pass through myself several times more energy per second than Azula. However, it's funny that in volume I only surpass Azula by no more than 4 times, as the same test showed, and only her more powerful, hotter flame allows her to keep up with me in battle given such indicators. It turns out I greatly underestimated the power of her fire because I previously thought that if I surpass Azula in the amount of bending, it's by no more than 1.5 to 2 times. And it turns out like this. Of course, I've seen. The entire ship's crew has seen how you do it. To achieve what I have achieved in bending and am achieving to this day, I had to meditate like that since I was 11, and only very recently did I start mastering the fire element. So don't talk about what you don't understand, Azula, or you'll look quite foolish in the eyes of someone who understands the issue. I'm sorry, Garo, I didn't mean to offend you. It's okay, Azula, I understand, so I'm not offended. As I said, our lineage was quite strange, and we understood this no less than everyone else. The conversation somehow faded on its own, and each of us thought about our own things. I was devising ways to use lightning and how to further improve my characteristics. How to become even more dangerous. Start paying more attention to the other elements? Earth and air are my least developed elements, especially air, and that should be corrected. However, besides that, it's worth continuing lightning training, as it allows for the fastest development of throughput capacity and reserve, and also trains control over energy, not over elements. Azula distracted me from my thoughts by touching my hand. "Garo, my legs hurt, can you help?" she asked. "HM? If you want a massage, just say so." Making up reasons here. Chapter 37. The sheer abundance of readily available and incredibly cheap energy is truly remarkable, even if it is just thermal energy, and even though the full conversion of heat into mechanical power is still in its infancy here. Yet, the accessibility of this vast amount of energy has enabled the Fire Nation, even in its colonies, to create this monster. Standing at the control room window, I marveled at the pinnacle of engineering thought and production power of the Fire Nation. Hundreds of meters long and about 50 meters in diameter. Hundreds and thousands of tons of metal, an immense amount of labor hours, and an unimaginable amount of energy were poured into this mad, yet incredible project. A massive drill that, with its monumentality and functionality, surpasses everything created in my past world. Even space shuttles seem somewhat less impressive in comparison to this marvel. And yet, electronic technology has not been discovered here, and this entire machine operates on the same old steam power. Honestly, whoever came up with this is a genius. A genius of engineering, and I would very much like to meet them. I would express all my respect. I stood at the window, watching the slowly moving sections of the massive drill. It reminded me of the movement principle of a worm. First, one section moves, then, with the help of hydraulic spikes, this section anchors in the ground and pulls the rest. When the rest are pulled forward, they also anchor in the ground, thus propelling the front, the heaviest part, forward. And all this is powered by hydraulics. "Do you like it?" the man responsible for the mechanism, a firebender in ceremonial robes, asked me. "I'm amazed," I responded, not hiding my excitement. I spoke the truth. Back in my previous world, I was fascinated by robotics and various mechanisms, technology, and so forth, from a young age. Later, the interest dimmed, lost amidst a flood of information and memories. But now, it seemed, this interest reignited with newfound strength, and my inner self trembled at the thought of this drill. "I didn't think you'd be so attracted to these machines, Garo," Azula commented from her throne, which had been installed for her along with 2 seats beside her for my anti-Lee. Upon our arrival, Azula began to fuss upon seeing that no seat had been prepared for me, a member of her entourage, then actually started whispering about whose seat to give me. However, standing next to her, I heard this first and immediately said I hadn't planned to sit anyway, so it made no difference. This response somewhat calmed Azula, and I surveyed the drill from the top of the control room that had risen to a significant height. If the drill's size impressed me upon approach, it was only from here that I truly grasped how incredible this creation was, seeing it in its entirety from above. No, these machines, as you put it, don't captivate me, but creations like this, the crowning achievements of engineering thought and technology, simply make me tremble with admiration. Such work, all of it, the labor of thousands of people, encapsulated in all this metal, even in your throne, Azula. All made by people, and that impresses me. Machines, they're more like a very old, almost forgotten hobby and fascination of mine. Azula just nodded to my words, having listened attentively and looking thoughtfully around. "Oh, Mr. Garo, I'm very glad you understand and feel the same as I do," the man in charge of this marvel, standing in the middle of the control room, said with a sincere smile. Besides us, 4 firebender guards were present, protecting this place and, specifically, the members of the royal family. Actually, royal indeed. The Fire Nation exhibits all the characteristics of an imperialist state. A powerful military and police force, a rigid power structure with a single ruler, a large territory, an active foreign policy, significant influence on the political scene. In other words, Azula is the heiress to an empire, and the title of Fire Lord signifies the emperor. So, I find myself in the entourage of a member of the royal family. The only problem for her, when ascending, will likely be fending off those who wish to dethrone her. But Azula is very strong and will become even stronger over time, so there's nothing to worry about. She's probably already stronger than her father at her age, and her potential is higher. Besides the 4 guards, 20 other people were in the control room, each responsible for their own task, all led by the man in charge. A well-oiled machine. Although deep down, I still harbor memories that cause a distaste for the Fire Nation, seemingly for life, I can't help but admire the unity, responsibility, and cohesion at the heart of this militarized empire. I stood on the bridge, looking out the window at the approaching walls of Ba Sing Se. Like Omashu, the cities seemed impenetrable, but while Omashu was just a large and powerful city, Ba Sing Se is more like a small, separate state, completely autonomous, capable of sustaining itself and withstanding any siege, keeping enemies at bay for years. Demonstrated years ago when General Iroh failed to conquer it and surrendered, retreating. I smiled at the progress and prepared myself. Soon, I could uncover all the secrets of Ba Sing Se, especially its secret special division, about which I, as Joe, had gathered so many rumors that I was now practically drooling. I didn't even learn the name, but the rumors about their capabilities varied widely. And I want to acquire that knowledge. Sparks of discharge ran along the handrail I was holding. I caught their sight and again took a deep breath in and out, calming myself. A new unexpected problem has emerged in recent days. In moments of strong emotional surge, my mana automatically becomes hyperactive, entering a state of uncertainty and transforming into the closest form of mana to this state, lightning. My energy has shown incredible adaptability after weeks of frequent use of lightning and this charged, uncertain mana. My energy has started to adapt out of habit. But this wasn't a new element or bending, it was just a new form of mana. And so my mana adapted very quickly. On one hand, its great lightning forms much faster, generating as easily as I create fire, without needing to go through several complex stages and create charged mana by colliding oppositely saturated emotions. My mana immediately takes the necessary form of quantum uncertainty, saving a lot of time. However, for the first time, there were negative side effects. In moments of emotional saturation, mana involuntarily enters an excited state and transforms into the simplest form. Elemental forms are too complex, but the form of uncertainty is relatively simple in essence. And releasing pseudo-electricity is that negative consequence. How am I supposed to have sex now? Find a new partner every time? The stronger the emotions, the more electricity I generate. And it's dangerous even for me. In small doses, it doesn't harm me, at the limit, it even helps. Gradually, my body adapts to this unusual form of mana, dangerous as it is. But if the emotions are too strong, I might kill myself with a large amount of electricity. I really dislike that I can't fully control myself. With bloodbending, I've become accustomed to having almost complete control over myself, and such knowledge is not at all reassuring. My further musings were interrupted. And no, not by Azula, not by Ty Lee, or anyone from the guards. "We have guests," I whispered and turned, heading for the exit of the control room. "Garo, where are you going?" Azula asked, standing up from her throne, ready to follow me wherever I was going. "Oh, don't worry, I just sense that some old acquaintances of mine are nearby. I want to greet them, have a chat. No need to worry. Rest, Azula, your legs need it. And when I return, I'll get a new massage, all right?" I don't know what influenced her more, my arguments or the massage offer. She's really gotten hooked on it, so I wouldn't be surprised if that swayed her. Massage? Garo, you know how to do massages? Will you give me one? Ty Lee asked me, smiling cheerfully. Of course. If you want, I'll do it right after Azula. But for now, I need to step away. I headed for the exit, catching Mai's suspicious glance. Does she suspect me of something? I haven't given any reason. Well, let it be. Meanwhile, I felt my dear guests getting closer and closer. It seems they have a newcomer. Although the number remains the same, I can clearly sense it. Smiling, I left the control room and began to descend, simply jumping from the height. I haven't learned to use jet propulsion yet. I still lack the control over fire to compress it even more, but gliding with gradual descent is well within my capabilities. Streams of dense, tightly compressed fire burst from my hands and feet, preventing me from falling to my death, and I began moving toward those I sensed. Chapter 38, Katara, be careful, a girl shouted, and with a stomp on the ground, she pushed Katara aside with a thrust of earth. A fireball EW to the spot where Katara had just been, scattering flames across the ground. Aang, Katara, and the new girl, a master of earthbending, braced themselves for battle. I emerged from behind another rock where I had been hiding just moments before. How did you notice me? I'm certain I didn't make a sound, rid myself of all sense, and didn't even focus my attention on you. How were you able to detect me? I asked the earthbender. So I told you. Who even are you? She asked me, taking a stance, ready to use her bending. Hey, where's your brother? Did I hit him hard last time? Now I don't feel him anywhere. I said, looking around for emphasis, ignoring the earthbender's question. In response to my question, ice needles EW at me, which I dodged effortlessly, but continued to watch the group of children relaxedly. You killed Sokka, she screamed, and new ice needles and sharp ice discs EW at me, while I dodged water whips a couple of times. Meanwhile, Aang and the earthbender did nothing, perhaps letting Katara vent all her anger on me. After all, it seems I had taken her brother's life. Or they didn't want to hurt Katara, whom I kept in the line of attack of the remaining two. It's good they didn't think to split up. So he really died then? I asked when Katara stopped attacking, catching her breath. Pity, I liked him the most out of your little group. Well, dead is dead. With a scream, she attacked me again with new strength and enthusiasm as a waterbender. Gradually, as she attacked, I closed the distance between us, and finally, ducking under another water whip, I dashed toward Katara, quickly closing the distance while dodging a rock that sprang from the ground to meet me. Closing the distance to Katara, I hit her in several points with pinched ingers, depriving her of the ability to use her bending for some time, then with an elbow strike to the face to disorient her, and moving behind her, I twisted one arm and grabbed her neck with the other. In this position, I turned to face the remaining two. In my hand appeared a fire dagger, aimed at Katara's heart but stopped millimeters from her skin, allowing her to feel the heat of the flame and burning through her clothes. Now, dear loafers, we can talk. Hey, girl, I warn you, use bending, and I'll incinerate her heart before the earth can even shift a little. You too, Aang. Let Katara go. What do you want? Aang shouted, while the earthbender looked at the ground. What do I want? Freedom, the ability to study bending freely, power, but all that will come to me anyway, or I'll take it myself. And I won't let her go. I don't want you to cheat right now by entering the avatar state. I might have gotten a bit stronger, but I'm not a madman dreaming only of battles. I realize that I don't have the strength or skills to openly confront you successfully yet. I'd last some time, but that's it. So, Aang, we'll have to postpone our showdown for later, and for now. I want you to stay away from Ba Sing Se. There's too much there that interests me, too much knowledge, so if I ND out that you, or your new friend, show up near the city, I'll immediately turn Katara into ashes, sending her after her brother. Am I making myself clear, Avatar? I raised my voice, forcing Aang to think faster. He's not lying. The earthbender said. Oh, you can detect lies? And how interesting. You didn't even look at me. Then it dawned on me, so you feel the vibrations of the earth? And you're doing it constantly, without overloading your brain, you're blind? Well, Aang, it looks like you've got a real earthbending genius in your team. I nished my deduction, turning to the avatar. How do you know? The blind earthbender shouted, lifting her head. Now I saw her cloudy gray eyes, which she looked straight ahead with. It doesn't matter. So, Aang, what's your positive response? Leave now, and in a week I'll ask to have your friend delivered, say, to the coast, on the other side of the Serpent's Pass, where she'll be left. As a guarantee that you won't interfere with us, especially in Ba Sing Se. At least for the understanding that it would lead to another friend's death. Unless she means something to you. If not, I can kill her, burn her alive, right here. No! Aang exclaimed, catching on. Don't harm her. We'll leave, all right, just don't do anything bad to her. Wonderful. Allow me a question, do you remember our last fight, Aang? I asked, wanting to know if he remembered that I could bend multiple elements. I knew nothing about the Avatar's condition, it might wipe my memory completely. Only how you almost exploded me, and after that, I remember almost nothing. Clear enough. In that case, I'll head to my people, and you go to the other side of the bay and wait there. In a week, your friend will be there. And I advise you not to deceive me, I'm not peace-loving and will kill her without a second thought. Good luck, Aang. And to you too, blind girl. I started walking back to the drill, watching the remaining members of the Avatar's team stand still. Soon, I was far enough from them and sheathed the fire dagger away from Katara's heart. Chapter 39. You'll still lose. The Avatar will save the world from the Fire Nation. Katara told me as she came to. I don't care. Anyone can be killed. I said I can't kill him in a head-on GHT yet, but from the shadows, he'll die just as easily as any ordinary person. And why don't you do it then? She asked mockingly, not believing my words. Because I don't want to kill him. Or rather, that's not my main goal. I want to defeat him. To surpass him, even without being the Avatar, with all his abilities and bonuses. I said. Very content to wish for such a thing, said Mai, appearing from behind a rock. But at least it's not boring. Why did you let them go? Hello again. And you should have hidden better, you're very noticeable. We now need to capture Ba Sing Se, not the Avatar. You can't catch two rabbits at the same time. Azula has clear orders from the Fire Lord, and it's not to defeat the Avatar. But now we have at least a week's delay to capture the city and fortify ourselves in it, sort things out, before the Avatar starts acting again. A week? Why so little? She asked. I doubt he would have kept his cool for a longer period without messing everything up for us. I would have kept my promise, and I nodded towards Katara, who was listening to us, would have been personally killed by me. However, then, although we would have dealt a serious blow to the Avatar's psychological health, we would also have temporarily faced a very aggressively inclined Avatar in his strongest form, bent on revenge. Primarily against me, and then against everyone else. And you remember what he looks like in the Avatar state. More precisely, you've seen the aftermath of it. Yes. You're right. And turning around, she headed in the same direction I was going until she stopped me. I looked at Katara and, focusing, put her to sleep. Picking her up and slinging her over my shoulder, I carried her to the drill. In a couple of hours, by all accounts, the drill would reach the outer wall of Ba Sing Se. And there, a brawl was sure to start, in which I'd like to participate. Chapter 39. Mai, Ty Lee, Garo, take care of the obstacles, Azula told us, as Earth Kingdom benders emerged as resistance an hour and a half later. Yes, Azula, Ty Lee bowed and with a smile, ran out. Following her, Mai got up and headed out, giving a slight nod to her friend. I followed them. Garo, wait a second. I've thought about what you did well, the right thing. Our primary task now is to capture Ba Sing Se, and splitting our focus to also deal with the Avatar is unwise. But why did you go to him alone? The Avatar is very dangerous, even if he's still just a child. Azula began to raise her voice, not much older than Aang herself, but if he enters the Avatar state, he could have destroyed you. Azula, my dear, I've already faced him in battle once and understand his danger, but that's exactly why I went alone. You've already been hurt by him and haven't fully recovered yet. Mai and Ty Lee could have offered him little resistance even in his normal serious state, let alone in the Avatar state. So, I exploited his weakness, his friends. If it hadn't worked out, I think I could have escaped. Or, at the very least, held out long enough to be noticed. Besides, as far as I know, the avatar state is costly for untrained avatars and leaves them almost helpless afterward. Maybe I could have held out in battle long enough for the avatar state to exhaust him. In short, I didn't go there recklessly, but ready for battle, wishing to end everything without it, for now. And I succeeded. Now, Azula, if you don't mind, I'll take care of the obstacles, or nothing will be left for me. The threat of the avatar was there, but now we won't have excuses significant enough to justify defeat. We cannot afford to lose. You're, as usual, right. Go! I quickly left the cabin and, focusing, sensed Ty Lee and Mai, as well as squads of Earth Kingdom benders on different sides of the drill. I jumped from the cabin and immediately activated my jet of fire, speeding towards the enemies. The girls slid down and jumped off the drill to the right side, leaving the left to me. That's where I headed, and when I was just 4 meters from the ground, I turned off the jet of fire and fell down, releasing fire from my feet and creating a wave of fire that spread to the sides, knocking down the benders not hidden in the trenches. Rocks EW at me immediately, but even before they headed my way, I felt the beginning of their movement, the beginning of the Earth's changes through vibrations, and easily dodged all the projectiles. Then, with a twist, I sent a tightly compressed jet of fire at the benders, which shattered against a stone wall erected in front of them, however. The crack of lightning was heard by everyone, including the benders behind the wall, and the next second the wall was pierced and destroyed by lightning, which did not stop at the wall and struck further, instantly killing 3 more Earth Kingdom benders. The lightning ceased from me, but by that time, I had already finished forming 4 explosive fireballs. A volley, and in the dust raised after the destruction of the stone wall, explosions occurred in the largest gatherings of Earth Kingdom benders. Most of the benders survived. The explosion wasn't too powerful for an earthbender, so I immediately ignited fire in my hands and sent it across the ground, then began to pump it with oxygen, increasing the intensity and strength of the burning. Through the sounds of burning fire, screams of Earth Kingdom benders being burned alive were heard, their ash literally roasting to coal in moments. Soon no one screamed, and I removed all the flames. Only charred corpses lay on the ground, burned almost to skeletons, and the earth itself was in no better condition, now literally scorched. Here I finished. I looked at the wall of Ba Sing Se and saw dozens of huge boulders crashing down on the drill, but they did no damage. As Azula said, "Take care of the obstacles?" I asked myself and ran towards the wall. I quickly reached the wall, overtaking the drill, and without stopping, jumped onto the wall. Behind me, I produced a reactive flame with my hands. Though insufficient for height, it was more than enough to press myself against the wall, and then it was just a matter of climbing with my legs. The reactive fire also provided a slight acceleration when running up the wall. As I covered a third of this massive over 100 meters tall wall, I felt the stone of the wall begin to change. The vibrations of the stone clearly indicated this, and there was no mistake. I leaped from the wall, briefly increasing the amount of fire emitted from my hands. The spot where I had just been and where I was about to step sprouted with stone grips, which I overcame and continued my ascent, constantly zigzagging from side to side whenever I felt vibrations alerting me to the use of earthbending. Meter by meter, I climbed, drawing closer to the end of the wall. And the higher I climbed, the more Earth Kingdom benders focused on me, ceasing their attack on the drill. Now, with a quarter of the wall left to climb, a ledge formed right in front of me, as well as a few tens of meters to the sides, trying to prevent me from reaching the top. Well, here goes nothing! With all my might, I pushed off the wall and EW back a few meters, aiding myself by spinning in a somersault. I emerged from under the ledge and immediately straightened out. My muscles were tense to the limit. I dulled the sensation of pain, and sparks of fire ignited under my feet and clenched STS, quickly growing into a massive stream of fire, concentrated at a single point. All this happened in moments, and then I initiated an explosion. The explosion propelled me with enough force to fly even higher than the wall, crossing over the ledge. My hands were slightly burned, tiny vessels burst again, but the pain was barely perceptible, and while controlling my arms was uncomfortable, it was bearable. Before landing, I released a wave of fire, scattering the Earth Kingdom benders away from me and slowing my fall, making the landing softer. As soon as I landed, I rolled, sending a jet of fire at a couple of earthbenders in front of me, seizing the moment, so to speak. I began to spin and twist, reminding myself of a breakdancer, and releasing more and more oxygen-enriched, heated, and expanded fire, then stood up and, quickly orienting myself by the sensation of blood and vibrations of the stone, began sending explosive fireballs at the enemies on one side, while the fire obscured their view, and then concentrated and began accumulating a charge of lightning. As soon as the fire cleared, rocks EW at me, and the ground started to rise in spikes. No variety at all. Before the spikes could cover a third of the distance, I dodged the rocks, hearing explosions behind me, and sent the entire accumulated charge of lightning at the Earth Kingdom benders on the other side. Catch this gift! I listened closely to my sensations and realized that I had eliminated the benders in this section of the wall, and it would take about 15 seconds for more distant ones to reach me, so I could prepare and take care of myself. Taking a deep breath, I enriched myself with oxygen and produced it in my lungs, focusing and closing my eyes. Behind the ledge, carefully placed by the Earth Kingdom benders at the top of the wall, I was hidden from view from the drill, so I could afford to let loose a bit. Thump. Thump thump. Thump thump. Thump thump. Thump thump. Thump thump. The number of beating hearts I could feel was growing every second. I sensed the blood in their bodies. I felt life coursing through their blood. The first benders to approach me started to halt and were ready to use their bending at any moment, but my eyes snapped open, and with a movement of my hands in different directions, I expelled mana from myself. And in the next few seconds, the chest cavities of the approaching Earth Kingdom geomancers on the side of their backs simply exploded, splashing out liters of blood with the life sharpened within them, and this blood ew towards me and merged into a blood orb, which I began to absorb as usual. The lives of 15 benders. The burns on my hands disappeared almost instantly, blood vessels in my hands and legs, nerves, all of it was restored, and a portion of the blood was absorbed by my body under my guidance as efficiently as possible. I didn't need all the blood, I simply had nowhere to put so many resources, but I had already absorbed the life within it. Thank you, Spirit World. You are the most wonderful teacher. Though I will try my hardest never to visit you again, as you have shown me too many horrors and too often I was on the verge of total annihilation, being consumed by stronger entities from which I barely managed to escape, I still acknowledge that surviving in you, I have grown very strong. And now my limit for absorbing life is 15 benders or roughly 19 to 20 people. Thank you to all the spirits that I was able to kill and consume. Coming to my senses after a minute, I felt other Earth Kingdom benders from different sectors converging on this section of the wall. I focused and began to accumulate a charge. A few seconds later, the first lightning bolt EW in one direction, destroying a wall tower, and a few seconds after that, a second lightning bolt EW in another direction, destroying another wall tower. This wouldn't hold back the Earth Kingdom benders for long, but it seemed to me that simply creating a parapet to the side of the wall and bypassing the obstacle would be beyond their intelligence. At least, they hadn't demonstrated such cunning before, so I was very doubtful. And so, I would gain a bit of time to recover after being fully saturated with life. Now, I would need a month or two to digest all that I had absorbed. Once I had recovered, I just needed to hold this sector, and in the worst case, I could jump off the wall and land near the drill's control cabin. And there were no witnesses left of the bloodbending, so I definitely hadn't exposed myself. And here come the first ones willing to throw their lives away. Chapter 40, You're Unharmed. Ty Lee exclaimed, throwing herself around my neck when I met our rapid response team on the other side of the wall breached by the drill, finding ourselves outside the outer wall. Azula, Ty Lee, Mai, and I had to work hard to prevent the Earth Kingdom benders from creating obstacles in the wall for the passage of tanks and a small number of Fire Nation soldiers who would hold positions until the arrival of the full army ready to land. However, our quartet faced the first wave of benders and soldiers. More precisely, a trio, as I had gilded directly into battle later, and there began to have fun with everyone. I acted in battle, as I had to admit later, too relaxedly and overconfidently, which led to 2 broken ribs that, however, healed within a couple of minutes. Still, I approached too close to intoxication by life force and acted recklessly. But the positions were captured, soldiers and benders dispersed and prepared for battle, and the girls approached me, and that's when Ty Lee threw herself at me. Alive, whole, and healthy, just a bit tired. "What are our next actions, Azula?" I asked, setting Ty Lee down on the ground. "We need to wait for the army's arrival, prevent them from collapsing the passage or restoring it, and then continue the offensive. We need to break into the city, into its poorer districts. After that, we'll need to fortify positions and wait for the entire army, which will arrive within a few days. You need to rest, Garo. You held the entire wall sector above the drill for more than half an hour and didn't let the Earth Kingdom benders interfere with us from the wall. Now you've earned a rest. I'll tell Father about this, it's a real feat, thank you, Azula." I didn't resist because Earth Kingdom bender attacks were not expected now. We had destroyed a considerable number of their benders and soldiers. Far from all, not even a quarter, no, they are many times more, but if they send them in small groups, they will only suffer losses without any effect, and if they gather them into one ST for a maximum force strike, it will take time, so we will have time to fortify this place. After all, their soldiers and benders, despite knowing about our approach, were more or less evenly scattered throughout the city and needed to gather together. Not many Fire Nation soldiers and benders arrived with us on the drill, but they were stronger than average, and also, the Fire Lord sent Azula here. She alone, even now, not fully recovered, would scatter if not all, then a large part of all the Fire Nation benders who came with us. She is a very strong firebender. And her father sent her here as a very powerful reinforcement, or rather, are the soldiers and firebenders reinforcements for her? For the next 6 hours, nothing happened, and I was able to fully recover, come to myself. Earth Kingdom benders were still absent, although I constantly listened to all my abilities to detect the enemy. And 6 hours later, large squads of Fire Nation benders arrived with reinforcements of armored vehicles and riding rhinos. A total of 1,500 benders and 4,500 soldiers with the support of 236 tanks and 400 rhino riders. Not the largest Fire Nation army, but more than enough to let the Earth Kingdom benders know that this time the Fire Nation intends to make Ba Sing Se fall. The rest of the army would arrive within the next 4 days, during which we had to break through those walls seen in the distance and enter the lower ring of the city. Engineers conducted diagnostics of all the drill's mechanisms during these hours, paying special attention to the most vulnerable and worn parts. No damages were found, so when the arriving squads fortified the captured territory, the drill was started again and continued its movement. The drill's speed was very slow, so 4 days for the rest of the army to arrive is not that much, actually. Garo, what about that friend of the Avatar? Do you really want to return her to him? Azula asked me a couple of hours into the drill's movement. I was sitting, or rather sprawling, in a chair specially brought for me, observing the work of all these people who organized and made this mechanical monster inevitably move forward. I'm definitely starting to like living and relaxing in such comfort, where you don't need to worry about problems like food and comfort, sleep and work. You can rest and do what you wish. I would say this is a direct path to degradation, weakening, and subsequent death. That's true for most sentient beings. They have no goal beyond what forces them to move to this stage. They don't live, they don't strive for anything, such people just survive. And what about me? I couldn't care less about all this and could very well live even in a forest, although I can't deny that this is definitely better. I came to Ba Sing Se with only one purpose: to acquire the knowledge that's here. And the accompanying comfort means fewer worries for me, which only distract me. Yes. If she's with him, it allows us to use her again if we have to confront the Avatar again. If not returned, we get an enraged Avatar. And that could jeopardize the entire campaign to conquer Ba Sing Se. But if we give her back, we gain more time, maybe a little, maybe they won't even dare to come here. We need to capture the entire city, completely subjugate it, and be ready to suppress any spots of rebellion and uprising, if there are any. Wouldn't it be better to set a trap for the Avatar and destroy him? She asked me. That would solve his problem once and for all. Yes, it would. But what if we fail to kill him with the first strike? The Avatar is a surprisingly resilient child. If he survives the first strike, it will be very bad for everyone around. We don't have the strength to fully withstand him in direct combat. Lightning is powerful, but not omnipotent. So we just give her back? She asked. Just give her back. Unless, of course, you object or have some plan of action, I added. Then, of course, we'll do as you say. No, Azula waved her hands and smiled. You captured her, it's up to you to decide, Garo. All right. 15 minutes of cheating in the chair, I found the most comfortable position and remained there, feeling myself slowly falling asleep. The fatigue I had experienced had not passed without a trace, and though I had recovered all my strength, deep inside, somewhere, fatigue remained. Azula woke me up, and even then, 3.5 hours later, saying there was some urgent matter. Exiting the cabin, we looked at the rapidly created trench of considerable depth, which appeared due to the actions of Earth Kingdom benders right in the path of the drill. Will this significantly hinder the drill? Azula asked the responsible person, who, like us, stood and watched the trench being created. The drill won't even notice this little hole, it's too big. But for now, Princess Azula, if they make it bigger, longer, then it might become a big problem for our work. Despite everything, our drill isn't perfect and can't, for example, turn away from the trajectory of a trench. Can't move backward, there's a lot it can't do. So we just need to destroy the Earth Kingdom benders so they don't interfere? Am I understanding correctly? And we don't need to worry about the trench that's already been created? I asked in response to his words. That's exactly right, Mr. Garo. If so, I'll head out right now. I'm with you, said Azula, to which she received my questioning look. This isn't just any Earth Kingdom benders or warriors you've fought and successfully defeated before. I looked closely and noticed their appearance. All wore uniforms in dark tones, visible hats covering their heads from here. It seems their hands are in some kind of gloves, though I can't say for sure from this distance. And who are they? I asked Azula. A special unit consisting of the best Earth Kingdom benders of Ba Sing Se, the ATLA. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in part 3. Peace.